I'm calling this meeting to order. This is a Redmond City Council study session held on Tuesday, September 24th, 2024, commencing at 7 p.m. Council members in attendance are Councilmember Stewart, Anderson, Fields, Salahuddin, Nueva Camina, and Council Vice President Forsyth, as well as myself, Council President Kritzer. There are 4 items on the agenda tonight: Redmond 2050, Final Planning Commission recommendations for adoption in 2024, the 2025 to 2030 revenue forecast, general fund utility funds, and capital investment program, Public Safety Funding Council subcommittee briefing, and council talk time. And we're also joined tonight by our Mayor Angela Burney. And beginning, the first item on the agenda is Redmond 2050, Final Planning Commission recommendations for adoption in 2024. Carol Helland, Planning and Community Development Director, will introduce this item. Go ahead, Director Helland.
Thank you so much, President Kritzer, and good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. Good evening. And 2 weeks ago, council members began discussing and providing direction on discussion issues raised concerning the Planning Commission's final recommendations for Redmond 2050 to be adopted in 2024. That's just a reminder that there will still be more in 2025. But this is the final package of amendments before you that will be adopted and planned for adoption in 2024. At the last meeting, council focused on the water system plan, the general wastewater plan, and housing. And staff has prepared responses to all the remaining issues and anticipates that you all will want to discuss those issues this evening and hopefully conclude your discussion, or if there are remaining loose ends, we do have some time reserved on October 8th to come back during that study session. To support tonight's discussion, I'm joined by staff from Public Works and Planning and Community Development, and there are 12 of them. So some in the room and some here virtually. So because there's such a broad variety of topics this evening and the staff number that are present to support your discussion this evening is larger than usual, I wanted to make some suggestions for how to facilitate our conversation. So first, we'd like to start out with the Public Works staff to discuss water and wastewater. And we do have a slide up here to help us guide through that discussion that notes the topic and the page numbers that you can find in your matrix for ease of reference. And so the utility staff and staff from PCD will be representing that item. We will also then move to housing. We have information on human services responses. We do have a response from the to the Snoqualmie Tribe letter and letter regarding culturally modified trees. We have some information about capital facilities and risk management, equity, minor changes for commerce, because we did submit our letter to commerce, which we are required to do 60 days in advance of adoption, and they did provide us with some feedback that we'll be going over with you this evening. And then we have some incentive requirements, information on electric vehicles, and bringing it all together at the end. Since we have a lot to cover, I was hoping that this slide that Jeff prepared for us could keep us all on track. And with that, I will hand the presentation back to Council President Kritzer.
Thank you so much, Director Helland. And council members, I will note, since there are so many different items to cover tonight, although typically in many of our 2050 study sessions, I've had the staff give a little primer before we begin each section. I think to move efficiently through this tonight, we'll basically jump to each section, and I'll ask whether council members who had outstanding matrix items have any additional questions or follow-up. So we'll start with water and wastewater. So those are pages 1 through 5 of the matrix. So I'll ask whether council members who have outstanding items within there have any further questions or comments. Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you. I know that the bottled water topic is listed as not a part of this work, but I did just receive a briefing about that. So wanted to make sure that we talked about in open session that that work will be coming back around, and as far as I can tell, that will be early next year, 2025. Is that an accurate assessment?
I was not in the meeting, so I'm not actually certain what you're referring to.
I guess I was going to talk about this later with when we have the Hopper discussion, but yes, the Hopper question that we're talking about, the earliest we could contemplate doing any work on that would be next year in '25.
Okay. Just wanted to level set on that one in particular. Thank you.
Thank you.
If there are other questions, we do have Public Works staff here, Lisa Rigg and Jeff Thompson.
Are there any other outstanding questions under water and wastewater? Councilmember Stewart.
I don't have a question. I have the first matrix item related to Overlake water storage for the Overlake neighborhood. Since our last study session, I met with staff, with Director Burt in particular, and just wanted to report back to the council kind of my understanding of the situation. So it sounds like we are no longer discussing the strategy of storing water on Education Hill and pumping across town to Overlake in that case, but as it's stated in the water system plan, we are talking more so about the Kirkland facility. You'll see there's an additional matrix item where I asked for clarification on the Kirkland facility, and I hope folks had a chance to see that the scope of that project has changed significantly from a painting project to a paint the existing tank to a change the tank conversation. I was told by Director Burt that there's a 25-26 budget item to renew modeling based on developments, based on planned development for Overlake or forecasted development, and that finance is currently beginning to find sources of funding for approximately $10 million in the 27 to 32 CIP for water storage for that facility, again, being in Kirkland. So I'm ready to move on from the questions I have related to this water system plan today. My main takeaway for this is that in the future, as it says in black and white in the water system plan, Redmond and Bellevue are going to have to work together on water storage for Overlake. I think this is a case because Redmond is adding the density in a larger way if all goes to plan, and we're producing the housing that we know we need to. I think that the neighborly thing to do is Redmond is going to have to be the one to put first dollars into that particular solution, and that is coming down the line in our future. So I like I said, I'm ready to move on. I think there's been some unfortunate confusion around this item, but happy to move on today and make sure that folks saw the clarification on the project in Kirkland. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Stewart, and thanks for the updates on that background work as well. Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Salahuddin.
Yep, thank you. I had a question on the wastewater plan, specifically the system risk mitigation planning that Councilmember Fields asked about. I think it's on page 5. Yeah. It says the city currently does not have a way to monitor the wastewater levels in manholes during heavy rain events, and then you plan on developing a flow monitoring program. Is there a timeline for, what that might look like, or, whether that's more urgent than not, and if we have sort of an indicator of that?
Yeah, we are planning on, at the start of the new year in 2025, developing a flow monitoring program. Our modeling assumptions are very conservative, and that's why we don't want any of it coming out of the manholes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Other questions? All right. Seeing none. Am I seeing a hand or no? Okay, just a thought. Okay, great. Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, which is the questions around housing, which you can
Sorry.
see. Oh, go
I
ahead.
apologize.
Councilmember Stewart.
Sorry, I wasn't sure what you were asking, if there were any more questions about, so I apologize.
I
for
think under
interrupting.
the water and wastewater topic.
Okay, I have one more on water. I wanted to call attention, I know that this had been an interest of the council, so I had put the question in on page 4 around PFAS testing. There was some information provided back from staff. This was something that the Planning Commission brought to us. Is this anything that the council would like to give direction on?
Council Vice President Forsyth.
Can you, oh, sorry, I just found it on this. What's the specific ask here? I'm sorry, not remembering this one.
Sure. So we're at the top of page 4. The Planning Commission recommended more frequent and expanded water quality testing in city wells. And when we clarified with them 2 weeks ago, the concern was really around PFAS. So on page 256 of that attachment, it shows that the current schedule is for every 3 years. The staff provided comment that we could increase testing with fairly minimal additional investment, and they provided some nuance to the answer there. Again, it was something that the Planning Commission brought to us, so wanted to have a chance to discuss that.
Thank you, Councilmember Stewart. Mayor Bernie?
If this is something that the council would like to explore, I'd rather spend a little time next year in like a study session format to talk a little bit about what that would actually entail and staffing and what kind of testing, because I think it's a broader subject than just PFAS. So I'd rather take a little more time with it than giving direction right now in particular. But I think it's worth a conversation about what it is we're testing and how we're testing. And I think that just kind of bringing everyone up to the same level of conversation and then talking about what more we should be doing would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Mayor Bernie. Just to clarify then, if the council were to wait on that discussion, would there be, it sounds like from the answer here that there would be sufficient budget to be able to cover that should you want to move to annual. I think the only reason why we would talk about it sooner would be if we would need to budget an increased amount of budget for annual testing.
And I would have to check into that, but it sounds from this response that it wouldn't be a budgetary constraint.
Okay, great. But I guess to the question, maybe to get a straw poll on it, we can get a sense of whether council members are interested using thumbs in increasing the amount of testing. We obviously can do a study session on it as well. Councilmember Fields?
Yeah, I don't know what, what the time movement is to be concerned about water. So I would need help with staff to say 3 years, not that much is going to happen. I mean, I don't know what does happen. Amoebas get in the water or something, but right now I don't have a clue as to whether 1 year, 2 year, or 3 years is sufficient.
And,
Go ahead.
I think Mayor Bernie's suggestion is probably a good one. I know that the Public Works staff is coordinating right now with the Health Department and actually evaluating whether it's the move to annual testing actually has benefits, whether there's unintended consequences, because if you change modeling and testing, you then end up creating a new data set that doesn't allow you to extrapolate in the same way as prior data sets. So I think the opportunity to have a study session after the new year, just because we do know that there won't be budget constraints, is probably a good one.
Okay.
Great. Let me then correct myself to ask the question, would council members be interested in having a study session in Q1 about this topic? Thumbs. I'm seeing at least a majority of thumbs interested in this. All right. So I think we can look at that. And it sounds like we wouldn't have a budgetary constraint at that time should we decide to make that change. Councilmember Anderson?
I didn't raise my hand on that because I had a question. Was the frequency of testing, what is that now?
Can one of the staff speak to that? I believe it's 3 years.
So every 3 years we do?
Right now, it's every 3 years.
Okay, and then the study session next year would be moving to annual testing, just to clarify that.
Yeah, so the study session would be, and I think it sounds like it overall would be looking at water testing on a variety of different chemicals.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Stewart?
I would actually like clarity. Is council approving the water system plan?
So council is adopting the water system plan. It then goes to King County for adoption, and then finally Department of Health gives the kind of the final approval of it.
Thank you for clarifying. I think this is maybe not the most urgent item on our matrix tonight, but this was something we were asked to evaluate by the Planning Commission, and that's why I, asked for clarity on the question. And with respect to Mayor Bernie's comments, which I also understand and have had my own conversations with Director Byrd actually about capacity that could be coming online with the new MOC and lab capabilities there and other things. If the council is responsible for approving the water system plan, page 256 of that attachment is where the testing schedule is that we are thereby blessing with our adoption. So I'm happy to have a study session in the next quarter, simply because I think it should be framed as a matter of public interest. We get questions about this a lot. We get concerned about this a lot. So it's worth continuing the conversation. But I'm a bit confused because it feels like the council is being asked not to edit a thing or not to weigh in on a thing that we are set with adopting or tasked with adopting. So that's where I'm at on that. Thanks.
Thank you for those comments, Councilmember Stewart. I'm curious, just so we can clarify on the process here, if we adopt this plan with the current testing schedule, but we have a study session in, say, in the first quarter of next year, or what is the process for amending that plan?
I'll speak to that. Excuse me. The answer is it depends. What our comprehensive, and the reason for that is that the water system plan fulfills some Growth Management Act requirements, and those have to be amended by the council according to the Growth Management Act. But what our comprehensive plan says is if it's a minor amendment, then those follow a much simpler, streamlined process, and some of it can even be administrative. And so if the council decided in 2025 we want to do a different testing schedule, that's not affecting growth numbers. It's not affecting the capital facilities project list. So that would be a simple, streamlined amendment.
And so would that be something that would come onto the docket?
It would not.
Okay.
Not in that case. It wouldn't need to.
Okay. So I guess the question for me that is posed by this discussion is it better for us to put the more ambitious piece into the plan at the moment, or leave the 3 years, look at whether that's what the right cadence is, and then amend it to a more current cadence? I guess, would it be harder to walk it back if we move to a year and then realize actually maybe 2 years is the best cadence? Or great. Director Burt?
Yes, good evening. Public Works would ask that you keep things as is. The testing protocols and standards that are coming out from the EPA down through public health, through the state right now are continuing to evolve on PFAS. And until we have a better understanding of really what those testing protocols are, we're operating under our current parameters, testing once every 3 years. So I do endorse what the mayor mentioned, that we leave things as is, and then we come back in the first quarter and we do a water testing 101 for the council. We can walk you through all the things that we do to protect the water health within our system. And then as the standards continue to evolve, then if we need to adjust the monitoring plan, we can bring that back for further consideration.
Okay, great. And I imagine, is there a difference between the monitoring schedule and the monitoring plan? So we could, in effect, operationally make the decision to move to annual before we actually amend the plan, or do we need to amend the plan in order to do so?
We can change up our testing protocol almost at any time, but this is the standard that's adhered to, that comes down from the state. And that's what we've been operating under. It doesn't mean that we cannot do it more so, but it just changes up the dynamics of how and when we collect. So you can always go more aggressive, but in this case, the standard is pretty well set, that has served the city well, and we just need some further analysis and study on the changing protocols around PFAS.
Okay, thank you, Director Burt. Did any of the other staff, did you have another comment on this?
No.
Or did, great, thank you. Well, I will ask, oh, yeah, Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, so as the conversations evolved, I think it's a tricky situation to ask the council to review something, but then not weigh in on it, and that's a really tough situation. So because it's the standard that we have today, not just in Redmond, but in the industry, I'm okay moving forward with this, but the Planning Commission did ask us to review this. So I think it's a conversation that we, the council, need to continue to prioritize. I actually disagree with Director Burt that we would need to schedule a water quality 101 for the council, because we had one on February 13th of this year. And so I think we can all go back. Amanda did such an awesome job. That was Jessica, that was a really great presentation that we had. And all of this was explained about how we test and why we test and all of that. So we actually had it earlier in the year, and I know our time is precious. So maybe we can all refresh ourselves with that, but keep it on the agenda, because when the Planning Commission asks us to do something, I feel obligated to keep it on the agenda. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Stewart. And I was also remembering that we had a study session on this topic, so I would say when we come back to this, we should focus on new information, and in particular, this particular question. I will say, just for the sake of raising the question, are there council members that have interest in amending the plan that's before us? I'm not seeing any, so I think we'll move on from this topic. Thank you for the comments. And are there any other comments in the water and wastewater section? Seeing none, we will move on to the housing section. So the first item that's on there, I think there is an open question that we left from the last our last discussion, which was around the detached single-family home size, the 4,500 square feet versus 4,900 square feet, and I'll let Council Vice President Forsyth kick this one off.
Thank you. That was exactly the one I was hoping that we could talk about again. We were short a council member last time we discussed this. We did have a majority of council members that were interested in the 4,500, but we didn't have a super majority. So we had a lot of conversation around what the Planning Commission talked about within these numbers. And I just wanted to get clarity on one point around this question. There was an email that went out to a resident about a house that's potentially getting knocked down in their neighborhood, and the square footage that was they thought was applied for. In the reading of that response to that community member, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is it the current code that there is no size restrictions on developed housing?
There's no maximum square footage for a single-family home. There are de facto size restrictions through lot coverage and lot size and setbacks and height and that kind of thing, but there's not a number.
Okay, so this is kind of new, but not completely new.
Right.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Great. So I guess we'll revisit this question, since I think we didn't have a clear sense on this last time. I will ask the staff, was there any additional information that you wanted to share on this since the last time we discussed? I'm not seeing any. Okay, great. And council members we'll see if anyone's changed their mind. So I guess we'll just do a set of thumbs in terms of who is supportive of the 4,500 square foot maximum. Or versus 4,900.
49.
All right, I'm seeing 5 thumbs for 4,500. So it sounds like we have direction on that. And I just want to also reiterate, I appreciate the Planning Commission's thoughtful discussion of this, and the council's as well. So moving on, we have a couple of other items under housing. Are there other items? I'm going to look through and see if there are some with open specific questions, but in the meanwhile, I'll open it up in case council members want to raise particular follow-up on any items in the matrix.
I see that Councilmember Fields has one about the green building incentives versus requirements.
And is there a proposal as part of that? I'm sorry, I'm just looking.
I've been told they're part of a different topic. I apologize. I was looking at housing and I didn't realize green
That's all
building
right.
is different. I apologize, Councilmember Fields. I am not trying to throw you. I really was just following along with the house.
Great.
No
you.
apology necessary.
Council President.
Yes,
We're all-
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. We're all struggling to keep up to speed, so maybe we could shout out page numbers of the matrix that we're on
Great.
and take an extra breath in between.
I think we might, yeah. So I think we were just on
Thank you.
15 to 17. Let's move to 21. So maybe I'll just run through the topics, and if people say closed, then we can be good on those, so that way we just have the chance to run through them. All right, so we'll start here. Yes, Council Vice President Forsyth.
I do have one. I don't know if it falls, it's on the pages we're on, but I don't know if it's technically housing on the daycare facilities.
Yeah,
Is
so
that part of
starting
this
at the bottom of page 21, that's
Is that a different section?
it. Nope, that's part of housing. 'cause
Okay,
these
so I
are-
can
it's
go ahead
included
with my
housing.
question?
Go
Okay, great.
ahead.
I will go ahead with my question. I have to look at my notes here. So I appreciate the response, but I think my question was actually more centered around traffic implications versus the time of day and the impact in the sense that the answer provided. So a lot of the comparables that are in the answer are around retail spaces that have a lot of parking. Daycares, as I've seen them in our area, tend not to have that same amount of parking availability, and then you get lines of traffic going out into the street. So that's kind of really more where my question was centered. I've seen this happen a lot with daycares in the area where traffic gets blocked up for a mile and a half. So I think that's the study I want to know about on the daycare facilities and how we're going to mitigate that.
We have Michael Hins online, if Michael has a ready response.
Yes, hello there, Council. I'm not sure if I do have a ready response to that. So the concern is queuing of cars during arrival, drop off and pick up. And could you just reframe your question, Councilmember Forsyth?
That was exactly right.
Michael, I might be able to jump in. The mechanism to mitigate that would be actually during the development review process. It's the similar situation that we get with schools. And actually, the TP&E team is working quite a lot with schools moving into the future about how do you make sure that there are less trips going to school because kids aren't taking the bus and other things like that. We can do a similar thing with daycares. Something that we do take into consideration with daycares that is part of the development review process is understand queuing. So for pickup and drop off related to the number of students that are in those spaces. So it's part of the code review related to these uses.
Great, thank you.
I would also jump in on this one to say that I'm glad to hear that in terms of where we can address any issues that happen in terms of traffic impacts. I do think that being able to have these impact fee reductions is a really powerful tool to make a difference on something that we don't have that many tools on in terms of being able to address the accessibility and affordability of childcare in our community. One of the things that we hear the most when I've talked with childcare providers is about the kind of startup costs and being able to actually have those facilities in Redmond. So being able to have some of these impact fee reductions, I think, is a really helpful piece, as well as obviously when we look at affordable housing as another kind of tool that we have in our toolbox. But I think at the same time, we do have to think about the transportation impacts, but it sounds like we can look at those in a different way. Mayor Bernie?
I just wanted to double down on what you just said. When I first joined the council, we had people coming to us who wanted to provide childcare, and our impact fees were really prohibitive in allowing them to start up their own businesses. And so I think it's really important to find that right balance, help them mitigate impacts of the trips of drop-off and pickup, and also allow them to operate their businesses in an affordable way. So I hope that you can kind of keep it in mind as moving forward, but I feel like that's one of the best things we did in reducing the impact fees for a lot of those childcare businesses to make sure that they can stay in business.
And I would note also as a kind of added piece of context for those who weren't following a couple years ago, but the city actually advocated successfully for a bill to pass at the state legislature that would allow cities to exempt impact fees for childcare facilities, specifically to help to address the issue of the need for daycares. So just wanted to highlight that as well. Councilmember Nueva Camina?
Thank you. My question, full transparency, is going to be somewhat adjacent to this, so not directly, but adjacent. So I understand that when a new business comes in, there's going to be an impact, therefore we charge the impact fee. Recently, we've been hearing here in chambers about how development is impacting the small businesses. So we're now discussing the impact that it has on the city, and then there's an impact that has on the business. So and what really triggered the thought was thinking about the impact fees being cost prohibitive and the margins being, making them the assumption that the margins are tight for such a business as childcare. Then when we have large development coming in, then that is then going to have further impact on that business. Do we have something put in place, and this is more for those that are listening, that this definitely impacts? Do we have something in place that is going to mitigate the impact on existing businesses that are smaller businesses like that with the development that we have coming in?
We can speak to commercial displacement. That is, it is a little bit.
I'm not talking complete displacement. Right, so the example that we have in chambers recently is development happening within a residential area. It's a business happening inside of a residence. The development is having an impact on it. So I'm thinking about something as important as definitely the industry, the specific business that I'm talking about, and then now on the table is specifically around childcare. And if it is in an area that is being developed, then if we need to take up a right-of-way on a road, then that's definitely going to then impact that business. You know, thinking about the mile backup that sometimes it will create. However, now if we're dealing with development in that area and part of the road is blocked off, then that is just going to exacerbate it.
So actually, so for larger daycares, the kind that you would submit that causes a quarter of a mile and a half backup would be one that would likely generate the number of trips that, as I indicated before, through the review process, we would be doing a traffic impact analysis. So the owner of those daycares would have to demonstrate they might be exempt from impact fees, but they would still have to construct a daycare in such a way as to mitigate the impacts of the effects of their project on the infrastructure and on adjacent uses. And that's all prescribed by the code.
And if it is a business that is not large enough to mitigate research, so if it's a smaller daycare in a residential area, and I'm thinking about a development that's happening just about to happen on Rose Hill, on I believe 83rd and 134th, there are 3 residences that are about to be demolished. And they are very close to each other. So then imagining the noise that that's going to create, imagining just the rerouting of things that that's going to create. If there were a smaller daycare in that area, it would most definitely be impacted. Do we have something put in place to mitigate the impact on smaller businesses, which have even a tighter margin than, say, a larger daycare that would cause a backup?
So we have our noise control codes that apply to everyone. They don't single out smaller businesses. But then we also have attention to haul routes and where changes can be made in traffic patterns, where road closures can occur. And it is a symptom of growth that there are going to be transient and temporary impacts, annoying and we do try to mitigate them. You'll see, for instance, signs up that say businesses are open, remaining open, where we try to communicate with the public to essentially say these businesses are still open, pardon the disruption that's happening. So we do use communication methods, we do use mitigation methods, try to minimize the risk to the best of our ability. And we, for instance, on the home that was being discussed out in the cul-de-sac, our building official did get in contact with the developer and has raised the issues. Sometimes it's good enough, or at least a good start, to have a conversation with people so they understand the impact that they're having, and they may have the ability to adapt to avoid that impact or at least reduce it.
Great. So increased communication, which is always great, and further relationship building. Perfect. Thank you.
And I'd add one clarification too on this, in terms of it talking about exempting impact fees. We're just talking about impact fees, not things like, for example, our new blocking the public right-of-way fee during construction. That, let's say, even if a daycare were to be constructing something and blocking the sidewalk, they would have to pay that type of fee or a permit fee.
Correct. It is just the waiver of impact fees that we're talking about. It's not the waiver of other standards.
Great, thank you. Any further questions on this topic? I think those were all that were within the housing section. If there's any that I missed, raise your hand. Councilmember Anderson?
I just wanted to say thank you for the full details on the MFTE question that I had, and it looks like that's coming back to council next year, so I'm excited to hear that. Thank you.
Great. That brings us to the Snoqualmie Tribe letter and the culturally modified trees question. I believe both of these were questions from Councilmember Stewart. Do you have any further questions, or would the staff want to just give us an update on this?
Oh, I just want to go back to human services. Could we skipped over that one?
I skipped right over to human services. There we go. Yes, of
11.
course. Thank you.
Pages 11 and 12.
Let's
bottom
go
of
to
page
human
11.
services, pages 11 and 12. It's a long list.
I think we're doing a great job, team. So this is a lot to cover. Thank you so much. This is just a small, quite frankly, just in my mind, a typo or a one-line change. I caught in this section where it's discussing the disparate impacts of the LGBT community, LGBTQ plus community. The previous text, or the current text says lesbian, gay, bisexual, and bisexual community members are having disparate impacts, and wanted to be able to include the transgender community. In my mind, that's the right thing to do, but also at the very recent budgeting priorities in community conversation that the entire council was invited to, I specifically received advocacy on the intersectionality of folks in the transgender community and what they're experiencing. So I offer this up as a suggested change.
Council members, are we good to add bisexual and transgender into the language here? Show of thumbs here. See thumbs. Councilman Vice President Forsyth?
Absolutely. I just don't know why we wouldn't use the full acronym for this one. LGBTQIA+, Two-Spirit, all of that.
Can staff speak to that?
I think that would be fine. We'll just need to define it in the glossary.
Yeah.
It may already be defined, but.
I would prefer the full acronym with the Two-Spirit and inclusion.
So it sounds like there's a proposal for us to include the fuller acronym with throughout the comp plan, wherever we have a reference to this community. Thumbs on that? Seeing not all around support for that. So if we can see those edits made throughout the comp plan, that would be great.
Thank you for the catch, Councilmember Stewart.
And I believe Councilmember Stewart also had a small suggested edit on the collaboration with Bellevue Re Water Storage in Overlake. That I'm not sure if that goes into a different section, but we'll just go on it right now because it's right here. Did you want to speak to that, Councilmember Stewart?
Sure. So we're on page 11. Yeah, this is the capital facilities one. We'll just be working ahead. On page 142 of the capital facilities section, it suggests, particularly with public safety facilities, the text says new and upgraded fire stations and public facilities. I'm advocating for inclusion of the phrase "and appropriately located." So new, upgraded, and appropriately located fire stations and public safety facilities. I think most of us are aware of the geographical challenges we have with our growth pattern, particularly with where the fire stations are located. And so would like to encourage this change.
Thank you. I was actually discussing a different item, but that one is also, there are 3 edits in a row from you, so let's just cover them all quickly here, unless staff disagrees with it. So we'll just cover this one. Council members, do you have any, or is there any concern about making this proposed change? Thank you. I see no concerns, so we'll move forward with that one. And then would you like to speak to, on the top of page 12, Councilmember Stewart, one more that you had proposed?
Sure. This is in policy OV2, which is on page 225 of the document. In the water system plan, it lists storage facilities, and my suggested edit is to, it makes a suggestion about water facilities, and my suggestion is to include water storage. This is related to the prior conversation, and that the water system plan calls on us to work with Bellevue on water storage for Overlake. So the new text would read, coordinate on transportation and other public facilities such as water storage and regional stormwater treatment facilities that impact both cities.
I personally have no issues with this. Council members, do any of you have an issue with this change? Council member Fields.
I don't have a issue. I have a question for staff. Sometimes putting words in actually create limitations. So I just want to make sure that staff doesn't see by defining this further that it may limit it further, if you understand what I mean.
Yes, I did review this, and it is,
Red zone, yeah.
okay, thank you. It is consistent with language found elsewhere, and so adding it here does not make any change. It just makes it clear that the coordination with Bellevue is over multiple things.
Got it. Thank you.
And trending through the comprehensive plan, the use of such as also denotes not including, and not such as, but not not inclusive.
And I get that technically that's the catch-all or the card that gets you out of jail or whatever, but sometimes I think we go too far. So just want to be cautious.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it sounds like we're good to move forward on those 3 items. Thank you, Councilmember Stewart. And I think that brings up all of the ones that were under Human Services. If I missed any that are on other pages than pages 11 to 12, I'm kind of following our guide here. Please raise them. If there are none, we'll move on to the Snoqualmie Tribe letter and culturally modified trees. I'm curious if the staff wants to provide any brief context on this, since I think the question was whether the council had reviewed the letter as well as our response to the letter. So if you wanted to give just a brief summary, that might be helpful for the listening public on this one.
I can go ahead. So the city received the letter from the Snoqualmie Tribe, April 2024. So staff evaluated this recommendation and provided a response. We did not receive additional comments from the tribe after we provided that response. This was addressed in the Planning Commission issue matrix under issue number 9. And staff evaluated this recommendation but did not proceed with increasing the stream buffers for non-fish bearing streams 200 to 200 feet because a large portion of Redmond is already developed, and increasing the non-fish-bearing stream buffers would create nonconformities and wouldn't provide an ecological lift due to the disconnect of hydrological functions due to impervious surface and buildings. In addition, the city updated the stream classification system to be more in alignment with the Department of Natural Resources, DNR stream typing system. And the non-fish-bearing stream buffers are being increased from 25 and 36 feet up to 50 feet. So they still are being increased, just not to the 100 to 200 feet.
I'll add that there were a couple other topics in the letter that did result in changes to the comprehensive plan. There were multiple changes made in the natural environment element based on the letter, including statements on the significance of the Redmond area to local tribes and references to indigenous knowledge, additions in the background about tribal stewardship of area, land, and waters, and again, indigenous knowledge. And then on, and this is related to the next issue, but also statements about culturally modified trees and an addition to a policy, an addition of a policy in the natural environment element related to culturally modified trees. And then in the park element, also some similar language, so some similar language about stewardship and indigenous knowledge also in the park element.
Thank you very much. Are there council member questions on this topic? I'm not seeing any. I would just note that I am interested in not necessarily changing this, but I do think the council understanding a little bit more about the issues around the buffers around streams and some of the constraints that we might look at. I know that this is a conversation that's going on at the state level right now in terms of engagement with tribes and thinking about what's the appropriate levels of riparian buffers. And I think it would be helpful for our council at some point in the future, maybe in the upcoming year, for us to be able to get some more information on this. And I think in particular, what are the nonconformities that make this so difficult for us to be able to increase those buffers and be able to respond to this, since I know this is something that is of importance, not only to the Snoqualmie tribe, but other tribal groups that work in our area as well, that other tribal governments in our area. So I guess that would be a request of mine, and I'm curious if the council would support us having an item come back to us to be able to review more on this request, even if we don't include it in the current comp plan update. Thumbs on that one? I see thumbs there. Great. Okay. Great. So that would be my request, unless staff has any other comments on that. Okay, great. Are there any other comments on this topic? Otherwise, we'll move on to the capital facilities, which we might have hit. I think we already did that one. Okay, great. Yes, I think we did that one already. So great. So we'll move to risk mitigation. Let me just move my notes here. Page 6. So risk mitigation at the very bottom of page 6 was a question from Councilmember Fields. And I believe that was the main question that's here. So are there any further questions or comments on this? Councilmember Fields.
Yeah, no, I appreciate staff and the mayor's office recognizing and acknowledging that as we move forward, that this is something that needs to be monitored, and this is something that we need to keep sort of that moving target on. So I'm good with this, and I appreciate that it's been acknowledged. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Unless there's other comments, we'll move on to the next item, which is starts on page 12, and it is a discussion of the definition of equity within the comprehensive plan. I believe this was Councilmember Stewart's item. Councilmember Stewart, do you have any further comments or questions on this?
Actually, I would like to hear just a little bit more. The question that I raised for those who are scrolling to that page, it's page 12. So I noticed that the definition in the glossary includes that the city provides all community members with equal and effective city services, and my question was specifically around the difference in that definition from the last time the council saw the draft Ready AR plan. The definition of equity in that working draft had been about equal access to services, not equal services. So I would like to hear, there is some information here, but I'd like to hear just a little bit more about where we are and why we chose to include this current definition in the plan.
So I can speak a little bit to that. The language that the council saw in the spring has actually been revised through an internal process. So we did actually include the very specific language that is from the Ready Plan now as it exists. What I understand from the conversation that was had at the Planning Commission, and I would love for either Jeff or Becky to expand on that in a minute, is that they were very focused on outcomes, the community. And the community talked about you can provide equal access or equitable access to communities and still have inequitable outcomes. And so they basically had a very robust conversation about that and came up with the definition that you see that's recommended in the glossary. Since you raised this issue, what I did is the Ready Plan is continuing to go through internal conversations, and the welcoming committee right now is actually reviewing it. I've forwarded this the glossary definition from the comprehensive plan to them with the intention of providing some information about the Planning Commission conversation to see if it makes sense to align the Ready Plan definition more consistently with this one, understanding that the documents are for different purposes. So the comprehensive plan document is what the community envisions for itself for the future in Redmond. And the Ready Plan is really our internal document on how we organize ourselves to, in a way that is respectful and equitable and diverse and inclusive. So that your comment has been forwarded on to the team that is currently working on revisions to the Ready Plan before it is finalized, with the context of the conversation that the Planning Commission had.
I really appreciate that, and thank you. Yes, I understand these are different documents. It's also one of our guiding principles of the whole thing, so I do think it's really important. Do you think we would, by October 8th, then be able to have a response from them?
I can try. The interesting thing is this reflects what the community really felt that was important for inclusion in the comprehensive plan. So the likelihood is if the Ready Plan definition were to change, that would be fine. This one will not probably change because of the robust conversation that was had at the Planning Commission and the community's feelings about how they view equity.
I could provide a little bit of context with that too. The definitions for all of our themes, equity, inclusion, sustainability, and resiliency, were all one of the very first conversations we have with the community is how are we going to define those terms for this project? And it went through a robust community conversation and redefining those definitions specifically for the project. And that was important to us because everybody had slightly different definitions of equity and inclusion. The city didn't have one at that point in time, an official one. And so in order for the community conversations that followed over the next several years to have some continuity, those first conversations were what definition are we using for this project? And so they were adopted through a process that involved a lot of feedback, personal stories, all of that's been documented and it is on the Redmond 2050 website. You can see the first proposal and then the community feedback and revisions.
Okay, thank you. So I can appreciate that I was not here during the development of this, and then this is reflecting something else. So thanks for that context. I'm always skeptical of this phrase around providing equal levels of service when sometimes we're going to have to do things differently to achieve the outcome of great service. But I think the intent, as has been described, is very much focused on the outcome. And I'm really glad to have this as a guiding theme for our comprehensive plan. Thank you.
Councilmember Nova Camina.
Thank you, Council President. And to just off of Councilmember Stewart's, I share the same concern about when we're talking about equity and then we're using a word like equal, because they're not synonymous. They sound very similar, but they are not synonymous at all. So I just wanted to have a better understanding of the definition to make sure so that I can fully buy into this. Was the hope of having effective and influence, those specific words in there, was the hope of that to actually get to the heart of equity while including the word equal?
Yes, and there was a lot of discussion about whether they should keep that word equal or not. That actually it was a fairly robust conversation about how do you include a word in the definition which is a part of the word. So we ended up keeping it because it was important to understand that there is two pieces and parts that are equal in the weight, right? We do need both access and outcomes to be important and get everything to work in the right way. But as Director Helen mentioned, the community and the Planning Commission's focus was on making sure that we didn't sideline the outcomes, because especially, and like even park services was brought up many, many times, but in other ways too, just our forms don't necessarily mean that the outcomes are great if the forms are hard for certain people to fill out, right? So yes, the form is out there, everybody has access to the form, but if you can't fill it out, then you're not getting the right access, right? So there's all sorts of examples that came up during the process, and so they really were wanting to make sure, that's the reason why effective got put in there, is it doesn't make sense if you don't include the outcomes and really focus on the effectiveness of what you're doing. And so that's where they landed on that specific language.
Thank you.
Thank you. And to be clear, when you're talking about the different processes that we went out to a community with, was this part of the contracting we did with Eastside for All to reach out to community, or what was this?
No, actually, very good question. This was before then.
Okay.
This was really early on. We did a number of focus groups. We did language engagement, but it was all through our first contract with our first consultant. So we did BIPOC business engagement, language engagements. We went out to a number of organizations. We did go talk to the board of Eastside for All, and we had them as one of our focus groups. We actually went to the board meeting. So similar, but through a different process, and it was, again, very, very early on.
Got it. Thank you so much. Well, hearing a little bit about the process for me, I think makes me kind of excited about having this community-created definition and hopefully being able to put that into our ready plan rather than, what a few of us in a small room come up with. I'd be supportive of this. Council members, is there any objection to moving forward with the current comprehensive plan glossary definition of equity? Mayor Burney?
I just want to clarify, these two definitions may not be the same. The Ready Plan, as Director Helen mentioned, is different than this comprehensive plan. So I just want to set the expectation that they might indeed be different, and that will be okay. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Although I think, as Director Helen mentioned, we will in the future be seeing the Ready Plan and be making the final edits on that. So we might consider making the definitions the same if we want to say that we have the same definitions across the board, but we may also come up with different ones.
We'll have to have a different discussion about that part because how the Ready Plan was developed was very, very different than Redmond 2050, and the Ready Plan included a lot of input from our staff as well. So I don't want to make conflicts here, and I don't want to make it cloudy, but I'm hoping we can right now just stick on the definition that Redmond 2050 has.
All right. Well, I guess as you mentioned, the question before us is what we want in 2050, and in the future, we will have the opportunity to look at the Ready Plan. Councilmember Anderson.
I wanted to say thank you to Ms. Stewart for bringing this up. I think this is a good catch. And one thing I noticed in the READY plan is the words decision-making processes, the inclusion of people in decision-making processes is super important, and I would love to see that in the comp plan as well. Part of our community engagement strategy needs to include all voices, and I think that's, I would be happy to see a broad vision for equity in the comp plan, but I do understand that the timing is a little bit off at the moment, so thank you.
Director Helen?
So I want to get back to the rationale for this definition. Remember, some of you were involved, some of you not. At the very beginning, we talked about the lenses through which we would view this plan. This was the equity definition that was used for the lens that we used to evaluate we have the other definitions, resiliency, sustainability, that we said we are going to view this plan through those lenses. As we will do a gut check every time we do policies and narrative to ensure that it is consistent with that and viewed through that lens. So this definition was a point in the glossary, was really a point in time for how the plan was developed, not necessarily a fixed point in time for how equity is defined on behalf of the city. The other thing is that the Planning Commission felt strongly, and this is a drafting practice, a code drafting and policy drafting practice, that you don't use the term that you're defining in the definition. So they had to figure out a different way to say, we believe equity is, that does not use the term equity embedded in the definition. And this is how they got to it. The other thing is that Councilmember Anderson, as you spoke to access to information, we have the public participation section of the comprehensive plan that goes into great detail about how people get access, how the city should be providing access to people with different abilities to receive information, to get information from the city. So I think those in practice, viewed through this lens, essentially achieved the outcome that you were asking about.
Well, decision-making is quite different than receiving information or accessing information. So if that's the clear, if that's what you're suggesting, that it's in that public participation piece, public participation to me is not the same thing as decision-making.
Right.
So I wanted to understand that the folks that are providing comments, and if they are taking extra effort to do so, that their input is included in our work. So that's all I'll say on that.
Got it. And that is embodied in the public participation section of the comprehensive plan.
Thank you.
I can add, PI2 actually specifically speaks to that. Involve community members in government decisions, including those who are most impacted by the decisions, and there's several bullet points about diversity, equitable representation, et cetera.
Councilmember Stewart?
Can I follow up with Ms.?
I'll go to Councilmember Stewart, then Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. I was just going to say, by way of closing this matrix item that I brought forward, thank you so much for the additional context. That's what the ask was in the matrix, was the additional context. And I also think this is proof of, I think this is what is exactly supposed to happen at this stage of the process. The comprehensive plan is beautiful and has taken years and years. The point of these last couple of conversations is to really just check on these last few things. So again, I have no request to change or anything related to this. It's super helpful to have gotten the original context so that I can understand and represent the plan better as we move forward. But thank you, everybody.
Councilmember Anderson.
Thank you. And just to follow up on what Ms. Fry had mentioned was the idea that we are accepting input, but not necessarily committing to listen to it and incorporate what the advice of folks that are from communities of color have been asking us for. And I think that maybe council can speak to this a little bit too, maybe not tonight, but the sense that I understand is that people don't feel heard because their advice is not getting incorporated into what we're doing, into our decision making. So they do not feel like they have a voice in the decision making process unless unless it's something that's maybe much more broader than has come up before. So I think that the challenge for the city is to really fundamentally think about what that means. I really apologize to council. I wasn't able to attend the Ready Plan session that was earlier this April. But part of that is, having my own feeling of what it's like not to have a voice in this plan. And then I would love to see some of the direction. I understand that not being able to participate means that I may not be able to see something I would like. But there are many people and many voices that we do not hear from, especially folks from disparately impacted communities that are more difficult to reach. And being able to come back and say, we listened to you, here's what we did, is more of that community-based model. And I would really love to see, in 2050, what does that mean for us and how did we do? So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Stewart?
I just feel the need to make the record more full on this. And like I said, I've moved on from the matrix item. The word influence is in here. In the definition, influence, in my mind, gets to some of the sentiment shared by my colleague. But again, as was referenced earlier in the conversation, we, the city of Redmond, did not well, we did a lot. The staff sitting with us did a lot. In fact, they were honored last Friday at a gathering of East Side cities during Welcoming Week to be part of a panel to describe the process we went through to hire organizations of color and conveners of color to create deep engagement in the process that built the beautiful comprehensive plan before us. So I'd be happy to talk offline with anyone who wants to hear me brag about Becky and Lauren anymore, because really they've just been celebrated so much in community lately, and very deservedly so. Thank you.
Thank you. And to the comments around the Ready Plan, just wanted to note, as I think is kind of noted in here, is that we will be seeing a draft of that plan coming to council for study going forward. So we'll have the opportunity to weigh in, which is kind of more around our implementation plan of how do we do this in the city. And it's one of the deeper dive plans underneath 2050. So let's move on to the next section. It sounds like we've covered this one. Minor changes for commerce. This is a staff item, so I'll turn this over to staff to speak to those changes.
Yep, thank you very much. There are three quick changes. One is Commerce asked us to specifically reference environmental justice in the plan. I think in reviewing the plan, we found that those concepts were present, and so we have included the language explicitly in LU9 and after LU23 in the land use element. That is where, so this is related to new state law that addresses this. This is a requirement for the land use element. So that's where you'll find that. And then Commerce asks for a population projection. We will add that. We've been dealing with dwelling units all day long, but we will convert that to population so that it's there. And then there's a mistake, really. We need to make sure that ADUs are permitted in the urban recreation zone because homes are permitted there, and the state requires that they both be permitted. Where one is, the other must be also.
Any questions on that? Is everyone good with those? Okay, I'm seeing some nodding heads here. So we'll move on to the next section, which is on incentives. Coming back to the one that was brought up earlier, there was around green building incentives. Actually, I believe that's the main question that's here. Are there any further questions from you, Councilmember Fields, on this?
I don't need to raise my hand because you called on me. Thank you. No, I appreciate the way I interpret this, and I do. First, I want to thank staff for taking the time to meet with me. I think it was a pretty good discussion, and I felt heard. And my take is, where we can, we have moved some areas of this into mandatory where we can and where there's not a lot of obstacle. And we have left open to further work. I believe that staff is acknowledging that we have some other areas of this where we can do further consideration. Would that be fair? And the only question I have is there was one on here that talked about carbon tracking, and it was identified as something not necessarily expensive or a difficulty for developers. And that is not my understanding of that. My understanding of that the tracking is in fact difficult and is objected to. So am I misinformed? Is that...
I will connect with Jenny and we will double check and get back to you on that one.
Okay. No, and I think that this, for me, this continues a really important dialogue going back to fairness on how our financial resources are distributed amongst our residents and people interested in Redmond. So I think that there's continued work to be done, but I do appreciate the progress that you've made. So thank you.
I would like to add something that we had mentioned in our meeting with Councilmember Fields, but didn't make it into the council matrix. One of the things that we've done to respond to a lot of the need to move the needle, but the market's not quite ready there, or the feedback we got was we can't do that because our lenders won't do it because there's no local comps. The comps are too far away. That's one of the reasons why we have a lot of those things like a mass timber product actually in the catalyst category, is so that we can get those comps in play, super incentivizing the first couple ones out so that there is something that can allow future development to occur more naturally. So that's another way that we're trying to skip ahead and get things into play a little bit faster.
Thank you so much. And yeah, exciting to see these incentives there, and hopefully see them taken advantage of. As is noted, I think it'll be cool to see what is taken advantage of, and then be able to iterate on that. Any other comments on this? All right, otherwise we'll move on to electric vehicles, which I believe was Council Vice President Forsyth's question. And I think there was in the staff comments a potential from, it mentioned that council could choose to reinstate a minimum EV space percentage. I wasn't clear if that was within this or after kind of watching how things play out. So maybe you could clarify what you were suggesting within that response. And Council Vice President Forsyth, if you'd like to speak to this as well, you can.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate the chart below. I did a little of my own research and sleuthing, and just looking at the current registered EVs in Redmond proper is 5,200, and in the city at large is 7,300. So trying to extrapolate that out with these 10 and 20% parking space numbers, I still don't know where I fall on this one. I want to see us have as many EV parking spaces as we can, so that will help make it easier on folks like myself who didn't have the ability to charge at home for over a year. So I'm interested in the conversation and where council feels on this one. I appreciate that the new building standards have these minimums. I didn't know if we as a council wanted to set something above that for the 2050 goal.
Does staff have any comments on this?
Sure. So the table that is in the incentive program that the council would adopt as part of Redmond 2050, which is this table, was developed, a little while ago, maybe a couple of years ago. And the world is changing rapidly. And what we have seen is market adoption of electric vehicle charging capacity beyond what the building code requires in some cases. It's not universal. There is an additional cost, but the cost to retrofit later is even higher. So, we're near a tipping point or at a tipping point, and so I think it's something the council could consider.
Can you clarify whether these are incentives for new construction, or whether we could put a requirement in for new construction versus, not requiring for retrofitting?
I'm going to just confer with Becky.
The incentive program that is in the packet today is for new construction. The package for adoption this year is only Overlake, but it will spread citywide with the next year's, the 2025 package. But it is all for new construction. If we want to develop an incentive program for renovations or other development, it would be a separate program.
Okay, great. I thought you had mentioned retrofit in your comments. I might have misheard you, so I was just asking about that.
What I meant was, if a building's already built and they decide that they want to have electric vehicle charging capacity, that costs more than just building it in at the first instance.
Right. Mayor Bernie?
So I think I hear where you are on, things have changed rapidly for sure. I'm curious, do we know the numbers of when a new building is built? How many they put in anyway, because there's such a demand in our community for these, and they find that as being a perk of, people wanting to move in. So because I know some of the developers I've talked to, they've put in quite a few, pretty significant. I just don't know. That's, only talking to a few.
I think we can pull those numbers, but I don't have them off the top of my head.
Because it seems like to have a thoughtful conversation about, you would kind of have to know like where the economy is at right now, what people are doing, and what the demand is, to be able to say this is the right number to require. That's my take.
Thank you. Councilmember Salahuddin.
Thank you. To respond anecdotally to Mayor Bernie's point, in my building specifically, there are a lot more Teslas than there are charging spots, and even the use of the temporary charging stations, those are 1 hour or 2 hours. They're always packed. One question that I would have to sort of piggyback off of this conversation, away from the developments, it says the city studying locations for deploying public use EV charging stations. Is there a scope of when we'll get information on that? Because I do see, the opportunity for, if there's close proximity, say in Southeast Redmond at the Mary Moore Community Center, that's close enough to be able to charge your car from where I live, for example.
So, Councilmember Salahuddin, can you restate what the question is?
When will we see the study for the deployment of EV chargers? Public.
I'll call on Michael Hintz again if he knows the date. Otherwise, we can get the date for you.
Yes, I can speak to this. We don't have a specific date, but we are embarking on the second phase of that EV work. The first phase was an equity analysis to understand where we would want to target public infrastructure. The second phase is to actually go out in those areas that were identified and engage folks on what kind of infrastructure they're looking for. Are they looking for it at their residences, at their places of work, both? So we will be having some focus groups this fall to engage those folks and understand where we should try to focus those public infrastructure investments.
Thank you. Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you. Appreciate the conversation so far. I have a couple of questions. Can you quickly clarify what, so number of EV stations is fully built, number of EV ready, what is that, and then what is the difference between that and capable, EV capable within this chart?
We'll consult with Jenny Liebeck.
Okay.
We'll write it down for you.
And, I'm going to suggest on this one, since I think I would actually support, if other council members are supportive, I do think this particular item could use a little bit more study. I'm interested in being able to look at the requirement. So curious if we might just be able to bring back just this item for maybe a future committee meeting to be able to look at this, since I think it may be the only outstanding one. And then if there's any other catch-all issues, we could look at that as well. But I'll get a set of thumbs. Are other council members interested in looking at potentially adding a requirement rather than an incentive into here? Thumbs on this?
So there already is a requirement.
Or adding the additional?
Yep. Can I have one more comment on this?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yes, Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thanks. I was just just thinking future-proofing, number of current stations, I'm fine with that percentage, but whatever the difference is between ready and capable, I would be interested in bumping those numbers up. I think that just makes sense to future-proof. So maybe ready is 40, 50%, capable is 50, 70%, somewhere in those ranges. But I appreciate the ability to bring this back and have more conversation about it, but that's kind of where my head's at right now.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thanks for bringing the question forward. In my mind, it's interesting because in our fight against climate change, reducing vehicle miles traveled and building a multimodal system is also really important, as well as transition to cleaner fuel vehicles. We have made some value judgments moving forward about parking and how we're going to let the market play a role in that. And so to establish a minimum, what I'm wondering, I don't have a conclusion, but what I'm wondering as I listen to this conversation is if establishing a minimum here is contrary to our other kind of principles throughout the plan for this very specific type of parking. Because I think that's what it's coming down to, is like a parking and space issue also. So it's an interesting conversation, but I maybe if we elevate the conversation to a higher elevation, there might be some guiding principles already in the plan.
Councilmember Nueva Camina, did you have your hand up? Oh,
No, I did not.
no. Okay, great. Councilmember Fields.
Going to your question about requirements versus non-requirements or incentives. From a personal perspective, I'd love to see them. But I also recognize, and as I said in an earlier meeting, there's a certain amount of maintenance costs and risk associated with having charging stations, including the fact that we have an epidemic of theft. So if, in fact, we make requirements, then what is our responsibility, liability, accountability to the people that we required to put in things that are ongoing, putting them into financial risk? So I don't know until I know more about that. I don't know how to answer that question.
We could get some additional information from working with Jenny Liebeck. I think that it's probably worth especially thinking about the context of what I think EV Ready is, which is actually creating the conduit for the installation of the equipment. And then to Jeff's point, what happens is the installation of the equipment is easy because you can pull it to a place where it's easily connected to a location that might have been just a regular stall, but now is EV available. So we can bring back some additional information about that and what developers are able to build. This also relates to the issues that you heard from PSE last week when they visited, and developers are making choices about whether they electrify certain things or how much demand they are creating for the type of uses that they want based on PSE's ability to deliver, because I think as we heard, their distribution is not as built out now as what they have finished with Energize Eastside and their larger transmission. So developers are needing to make choices because they contact PSE at the very first day that they come in. We advise them at pre-app, please contact PSE, tell them what you think your load's going to be, see if you can get energy supply. And those are the kinds of things that are creating delay. So I would suggest that a compromise is thinking about requiring EV ready, but not EV at this moment in time, because then that would be more consistent with the market suggestions that Councilmember Stewart's also making.
And I would put my thumbs up on that.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Fields. Council Vice President Forsyth.
In the context of when we have this conversation again, I'd be interested to know, since we have reduced parking minimums or parking stalls available, what a 10% requirement actually means. Does it mean 2? Does it mean 5? Because that could fluctuate quite a bit. So if we can have some more context on what that actually, the numbers actually are, that would be helpful for the conversation.
Sure, and that will also relate to the work that Jenny and Michael are doing with respect to public charging availability at curb locations and things like that, that Councilmember Salahuddin raised.
Great. Councilmember Nueva Camino?
Thank you. I'd like, when we bring it back, to have taken a look at, can we anticipate any unintended consequences when we're talking about equity and we're talking about decreasing parking spaces, just doing our due diligence and making sure that we're not making it that much harder from an equity for those that would not have an electric vehicle at that time. Again, I at first glance, I want to say shouldn't be an issue, but I don't want my assumptions. I want us just to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to explore any unintended consequences that might come up.
Great. Thank you so much. Hopefully the staff noted that. I think on this topic, just since we're near the end of this discussion here, there's one more item, but it was my item, and I'm good on it, which was really just looking at the whole document, and I'll just make a quick note, which is that it's been such an amazing and long journey on this, and I remember back when you were coming to say, do you want this or this, right direction, wrong direction, and when we said we'd like to see greener buildings, a more affordable community, and somehow it's all in here, and it's really exciting. So thank you to the staff on this. And it sounds like this is the main outstanding comment. So I think given that, what we can do, I think we had potentially a study session going forward on this, but what we can do is just bring this back to committee, find some time to be able to look at this issue, and should council members have anything that comes up in between, you can bring it up at that committee around 2050. Otherwise, the next step after that will be moving towards adoption in November 19th. Mayor Bernie.
So currently we have the 8th is a study session.
The 8th is a study session in our next TPW meeting. That we would be able to get on the agenda would be the November TPW meeting, which is on a Monday, would be on a Monday.
Yeah, and so can you let us look at the schedule a little bit? We might want to keep it on the study session if that gives us a little more space between the discussion and the adoption. So I just don't want to compress that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Or we could look also to a different committee, right, even if it didn't quite fit, to figure out the timing there.
That would be great if we could coordinate with council leadership to do that. I noticed in just discussing some of in the preparation of the actual resolutions that need to come forward, ordinances that need to come forward, we may identify some Scrivener errors that we want to address. It would allow us a little bit of time just to sort some of those out if we find them, so the codification person doesn't have to do it later. So we would use it to address the EV issue, which is the only one I had on the list, other than some topics that you would like to have a deeper dive on next year. And then any kind of loose ends that we find, numbering or things like that.
Mr. Churchill?
This is written in your packet either this week or 2 weeks ago, but I just want to highlight that next week at your business meeting, you'll be asked to adopt a resolution to set a hearing date for MFTE, residential targeted area expansion. It didn't come through committee, so I just didn't want to be surprised. It was just written in the memo, so. But it'll be on consent next October 1st.
Right, and it has to go through a different process. It's not a planning commission process. That's one that has to go through our municipal code adoption process, but has an added requirement under the MFTE regulations under state law that the council has to set a public hearing, hold a public hearing before passing it.
Great. Are there any council questions on that? Not seeing any, then we'll wrap this up. We'll identify the best next touch on this. So we will have one more touch before we move to final adoption on November 19th. And should council members have any final questions between now and then, please send them to the planning staff. And thank you to our planning staff for today. Mayor Bernie.
I just, because I think though there is one outstanding item, which I think will be a great discussion, I just want to thank the council and the staff for getting us to this point. I just had this kind of overwhelming feeling about talking about the history of coming up with the lenses by which we are going to do this so long ago, and getting to this point now where we're just kind of wrapping up some loose ends. But I really appreciate all of the due diligence of the council, finding even some small bits and pieces we forgot as we discussed today, but also just kind of the whole picture, as you mentioned. Things were brought up in the beginning, and now they're really wrapped up into this entire comprehensive plan. So really, thank you. And that doesn't go as far as I really want to say. We're hopeful that on November 19th, when we have the final adoption, we will also have cake to celebrate and invite all those that participated in helping put this together. So I just want to make that a public announcement as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all, and we will take a 5-minute recess and resume at 8:39. The Redmond City Council study session on September 24th, 2024. The next item on our agenda is the 2025 to 2030 revenue forecast, general fund, utility funds, and capital investment program. And we have Kelly Cochran, our finance director, here to introduce this item. I see a lot of excitement from the council members too,
I'm
so
so
go
glad.
ahead.
This is the best I've ever felt. We've got money. Are we done? No. Thank you. I cannot believe that we are at the end of September. So thank you for all the support and decision-making along the way. We've really created sort of ideal circumstances to move a lot of the things that are queued up for us forward. I'll walk you through revenues tonight and some of the big changes that I am proposing, as well as some of the smaller ones. We've provided a lot of assumption information so that you'll have it for your reference. We'll just fly by it and explain it on the graphs where the data is actually shown, but you'll have that for your reference, and we will go as quick as we can. So, as Councilmember Kritzer said, we'll be talking about general fund, utilities, and the capital investment program. We are entering our last phase of the budget process. We will soon be delivering the budget. That is next Tuesday. Yeah. And then we will start council deliberations soon in the middle of October. So excited to be at this point, both internally in the organization and to be able to share with the community what we're doing. So just to give you some economic context, for those of you that don't work in the field, I know many of you do. We are constantly watching CPI and the results to help understand where we are in economy. Typically, for our jurisdiction, we are looking for 3%. If we can have a CPI that is at 3%, that sets ideal conditions for us. The federal government has also been watching this, waiting for that 3% mark to be close. They made the decision yesterday as a result of some of the outcomes that we've seen late spring, early summer, to reduce interest rates by 0.5% instead of 0.25%, which was great news to hear. Some of the conversations that I have been involved in have really kind of stated that really the risk at this point of Pacific Northwest type of recession would really be generated by an air of not acting soon enough. And so this should help to alleviate some of the slowness in action, and we still do expect that there will be additional rate decreases before the end of the year. When looking at some of the other indicators that we watch, the top one really is quite good news for us. This is retail sales, and we're showing sort of a big bump in 2025. So that will indicate a healthy economic vitality situation for us and set some good conditions for our businesses. There really has not been any significant changes in forecasts for valuation on property. This is unlike previous situations where we've seen property prices escalate and then de-escalate in sort of an unplanned way, and we are not at a risk for that. We're seeing much better employment growth than we've seen in the past. In the city of Redmond, we are currently sitting at 4%. Our long-term average is 3.68%. So it does suggest that we will be past or over our average for a bit, but we're much closer than we had been at this point in the last biennium. So looking at the general fund, this represents all of our revenues, both the total revenues as well as just the ongoing revenues. We're looking at a biennial budget of about $300,000, which includes a $50,000 general fund surplus that we will be bringing over from this biennium. About 15.7 million of that surplus we brought over went right back into funding contingencies and reserves that we hold on to, salary and benefit reserves, economic contingency, and then we've also identified a need to hold some additional salary and benefit contingency in order to monitor and try to improve fire overtime. So we've provided some key assumptions that we're making with our revenue sources. I'm going to just cover this information as we are going through the graphs. It is noted on both forms. Just want to make sure that we are not redundant and can get to what we need to. So when looking at sales tax, which is our largest revenue source, the existing base that we have is growing as we expected in the 3 to 4% range per year. In the last biennium, Council had made a decision to act on a recommendation to recognize more construction sales tax as ongoing revenue than we had in the past. I was a little nervous going into the biennium. I think that we are in great shape. I wouldn't recommend that we change that. We've had the ability to kind of dive down into the details of our construction sales tax to understand what's been driving some of the bigger numbers and to understand where we will be in the future when we are done with Sound Transit, when we are done with Microsoft Refresh. We will still have additional capacity in the sales tax construction in addition to the 6.5. So I wouldn't change it. I think it was a good decision and it's helped us quite a bit. The recommendation that I'm bringing forward to you this biennium is to make a change in how we pay for City Hall debt. The way that that currently works is we redirect ongoing sales tax into a debt service fund to offset that payment. That is ongoing general fund revenues. What I would like to do is utilize our one-time revenues to make that payment. That is then bringing this debt in alignment with how we handle our other debt. All other debt is housed in the CIP, and we use one-time dollars to pay that down. We have about 7 years left on our City Hall debt payments, but I anticipate that we will refinance or refund this bond as we move forward and find a solution for the Maintenance and Operations Center. It is creating sort of an ideal circumstance to look at facility needs, including this debt, and refund it if the interest rates are favorable. We may also want to look at some other packages for debt as well. But this really allows us to create quite a bit of ongoing capacity within the general fund. It's a savings of about 3.86 over the biennium, kind of half and half each year. So that is on the table for council to discuss. It is queued up as part of our conversation we'll be having after this to discuss some proposals that are coming for the public safety arena. So we can discuss at that time unless you have questions now. All right. Looking at sales tax by function, I wanted to explain to you a couple of the things that we have our eye on. The first is the construction sales tax that we've shared. That's the second columns over. We've seen a decrease. We expect a continued decrease, but we will land somewhere around $6.5 to $7 million of annual revenue from that source once we are done with those major projects. The other is information. It is a sector that recently started increasing in a way that indicates that it is possibly ongoing. We are still researching, trying to get to the bottom of what is driving that. a little bit of concern that it may be related to the Microsoft Refresh project and then coming back and filling their commercial locations, buying technology that they may need to install to get things moving. We are sort of waiting a bit before we declare that we should consider that ongoing revenue, but it's possible that we may see a nice benefit or growth in the 27-28 biennium. So we'll keep tracking this and understanding more about what's driving that revenue source. The property tax revenue is typically where you would see our public safety levy funding suggestion come in. We are recommending a funding package to fill the funding, the public safety funding gap of $6 million that we have been carrying from the last biennium. So in this next 25-26 budget cycle, we are not queuing up a need to refresh our levy or go out for a levy. So we will allow council to sort of decide in conversation with city staff where the next direction needs to head. We have ensured that there is dollars available to work with a consultant and work with communication type needs if we want to pursue something in the next biennium. 1% increases are expected and built into the forecast. It generates about $260,000 a year. Okay. So utility taxes, we have a bucket of taxes that we currently apply to outside utilities. We have seen tremendous growth from 2022 until 24 in electric. It's gone up 26.4%, a little over $4 million over the biennium, and we expect that to continue going forward. It's really driven by some large rate increases from PSE as well as higher occupation in some of our buildings that are either new or were sitting vacant during the pandemic period. Something we'll be talking about in the next presentation is a proposal to apply a utility tax to our own utility. The proposal is currently at 1%. I've suggested that we phase that increase in over the biennium. The utilities can handle that cash flow, and it allows us to be a little more gentle to our ratepayers. When we get to the utilities in a little bit, you'll be able to see what impact that has on us as an agency and how we compare to others. We've got this queued up. And we'll be discussing it in the next presentation. All right, development revenues. I want to give a little history here so we've got some context because the graph itself can be a little bit misleading. So in 2022, we show really what is our peak demand. That is very, very high demand with really low cost recovery. And we have worked to address that in 2024, which is the increase that you see there. That is the increase in our fees. But the development activity level is continuing to drop. So we are looking at lower development activities, but higher revenues. We are I would like to talk about an issue that I see when looking at trying to keep up with our cost recovery goals within this revenue source. Nearly 90% of what these fees are based on is salaries and benefits, and we escalate them each year by CPI. When looking at what is really occurring there, We have some salaries and benefits that are increased per union negotiations or COLA amounts that are more than our CPI. And when that happens, we immediately lose cost recovery traction. In the financial policies that are coming to you with the budget, I will be asking that we change this policy, the annual escalation, to read CPI or COLA, whichever is greater, as one way that we can keep pace with that. Okay. Phew. Okay, excellent. I like it. Okay. Otherwise, things are going well. What I really, one of the things that I have really enjoyed through this budget process is some of the visibility that D365 has given us. It really allows me to track cost recovery types of relationships between our revenues and our expenditures, gives us the ability to see it happening and plan for it. So appreciation to my fellow directors from fire and from planning and helping us sort of overcome some of the obstacles we can see when we were early forecasting. So we're in great shape for the next biennium. No issues here. Licenses and permits is primarily business license. There is a few other things that are included in here, but mostly what we're seeing is an impact of our business license. This is another place that I have some recommendations. Right now, what the forecast includes is a true-up adjustment that corrects for CPI adjustments that have been applied in the past that were not as much as CPI. We estimated at the beginning of a budget process, and when results really came out, it wasn't as high. We had not trued up this revenue source for quite a while. One of the recommendations that I'm putting in the fiscal policy is that this happens each budget cycle so that we are not behind in our ability to adjust our fees when needed. The forecast also shows inflationary increases on top of the 3.7 of between 3, I think it's 4% a year. We've also added an additional proposal to help the conversation later in terms of solving some of the funding issues that we are having with public safety. I've been allowed a little bit of time to look at the results and the true impact of this recommendation. I have let some of the committee members that were responsible for bringing a portion of the recommendation forward that we can discuss either removing this recommendation or adjusting it to someplace else. So we'll bring that up later, but we've sort of found a way to cover some of that expense with what we have available unallocated in the general fund. As many of you know, business licensing is something that we feel needs to evolve. There has been conversations about how to achieve that and interest in looking into a head tax. I worked with a consultant starting in 2023 to analyze what that would look like for the city. What would the outcomes be? What would the cost be to us in order to get that up and running? What are the benefits? And
Did you mean a B&O?
Yeah.
You mean a B&O, not a head tax.
I don't know. We have a head tax. It's late. Just clap for me. That's all I'm looking for. So, yes, so sorry, a B&O tax. When we were looking at the results, there is quite a big increase in the amount of revenue it would generate for the city if we were to convert to a B&O tax. The issue is Number one, it completely contradicts the economic development plan that you have all been working hard to put in place. Really shifts the burden to our retail, and that is really what we are working very hard to attract here. The other thing that prevented me from moving forward with any type of real recommendation is I think that we have a lot to learn about our base. We went, you can see in the graph, increases pretty significant from 22 through 2024. 2022 is when we went to the state to handle our business license renewals. And through just really that exercise alone, we have captured more unlicensed businesses in the city, which leads me to believe that there is potentially more there. One of the things I tried to do was kick off an audit to help us understand that and ensure that we have everything identified, not only for business licensing, but also for utility taxes. It's been since 2011 or 12 since we've done those audits. Our RFP did not bring in any responses, so the budget will recommend that we look at a business license audit just separately on its own. It would be joint work between the planning department responsible for bringing you the economic development, strategic plan, and finance in a position to support them. That then would lead to an update to how we are structured. So we'll see that queued up for budget conversations. Right now, I'm not thinking it's wise to make any structural changes due to that. Questions there?
I just wanted to jump in since there was a little confusion there for the listening public. Just to clarify that Redmond does have a head tax. We don't have a B&O tax. So what our finance director was suggesting was whether we would look at switching to a B&O tax or assessing that and why we might not move at this time. But also that the proposals that we're seeing here are specifically looking at potentially some potential increases to the existing head tax.
When you look at Redmond and you convert our head tax into a B&O tax, we are sort of right in the middle, a little lower than average. So there is room for us to explore. And thank you for the clarification.
Councilmember Fields.
Yeah, two things real quick. The audit you described, what are you looking for? What audit of what?
We will be looking to ensure that people conducting business in Redmond are licensed.
So it's a gathering of, are they all reporting?
Correct.
Okay. And then second thing, on head tax, and you hinted at the business taxes and tying it to a different index. Is there a need to evaluate where it is and where it should be?
Yes.
Okay. And you're going to do that. All right, thanks.
Councilmember Anderson.
I just wanted to clarify, this is going to, the idea of searching for businesses, is that including unregistered businesses? Is that what you're looking, okay.
That's what we're looking for,
Thank you.
exactly.
Because it sounds like we need the data on that, which is why I was thinking it might be like the existing licenses and just like whatever the backlog is. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you. And along with this conversation, I know I've mentioned many a times that you and I have talked about the equity within that and what that cap is. And I was during my homework for this, I learned that Kirkland, I think, just changed their policy, and they have a $50,000 where I think ours is a $5,000.
Very low.
Yeah. So interested in that conversation to continue as well.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, you're good.
One of the other things that we are doing is consolidating staff that work to support business licensing, and we will be housed in the finance department. there is a lot of work that this staff person has identified that may suggest that some incremental changes be made next year to kind of clean up some things that we're seeing, and that would be an item that we could address.
Seeing no other questions, why don't you continue? Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Intergovernmental revenues for me is really all about grants and our lack of them. I would like them. So you will see queued up in the budget intention to focus on generating grant revenue to support some of our primary functions. Environmental sustainability, infrastructure, public safety being a few. So I am hoping that when we are sitting here in a couple of years, we will have great results and on our way to creating some sustainable long-term programs. So looking at just total revenues and expenses, we are balanced for the biennium. We start to separate after that. That's job security. We are looking at $38 million in growth of our existing revenues. That is our property taxes, sales tax, business licenses. New revenues that are proposed are around $10.3 million. And we have worked very hard across the general fund through a lot of the studies and updates that have been done to reduce expenditures in the general fund. And we've been able to reduce those by $13.6 million. So that creates a swing for us in the general fund of about $24.9 million, and is part of why you'll be able to see such positive enhancement recommendations coming to you. Any questions on the general fund?
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. On the general fund, I actually missed at the very beginning of our chat tonight the number of the surplus that you're bringing over.
It is 50 million. Great. And about 35 million of it is used to fund enhancements. The rest is to contingencies and reserves.
Great. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, let's talk utilities. So utilities, I wanted to just share with council that when we are looking at rate studies, we are really ensuring that we pass three main financial tests. Do we have enough income to pay our bills? Do we have enough cash to pay the bills? And do we have enough coverage for our debt? When we look at debt coverage, we pledge all of the utility revenues. So if stormwater has debt, we also pledge water and wastewater revenues for that obligation. So we have very little risk of ever not meeting debt coverage. When, you can go to the next slide. When applying those tests, the results of our recommendation are shown above. We are looking at 7.5% increases for water and wastewater, and 0.5% increase for stormwater. That really just reflects the need to fund the utility tax. No increases were needed to meet operational needs. I am aware that there's probably no way that council can see the numbers that are up there in the gray, but what they say is that we did not raise rates during the pandemic. When we looked at rates in 22 to establish budget for 23-24, we were very conservative, really only taking forward what we knew we needed. Again, just working very conservatively on how we impact our rate customers. In looking at how we compare to other jurisdictions, this is where we currently sit with 2024 rates. We are in the process right now of collecting information as it's presented to city councils and boards, and we'll bring you an update if anything changes significantly. Redmond Ridge, go back, yeah. Jeez. Novelty Hill, I just wanted to explain that our rates are high. They are. They are high because it's a very small customer base. It's about 4,000 or 5,000 accounts, and there's very high system replacement costs in that service area. The infrastructure was built and given to the city between 2000, and some of it is still slowly occurring now, but really stopped about 2012. And we are one of the few cities that actually funds depreciation expense. We actually fund it and set it aside for investment in the capital projects. So that is what really drives those rates there. The city rates, I swear I didn't fake this, are so low really because we don't have a utility tax currently, and we produce quite a bit of water on our own. About 40% of our water is supplied on our own, so that helps us quite a bit. Stormwater, for many years, I had to bring in the city of Portland just so we had someone higher than us. So, we were really, we took a lead as a regional leader in a lot of the techniques that we use and apply for stormwater, and have been able to really get by on that rate. We have increased it one time since 2007, which was in the last biennium. It was an increase of 1%. We're looking at 0.5% in the next biennium.
Councilmember Salahuddin.
Just a quick question on communications out to community members, because I think this is like really incredible to show, where we're at as a city compared to other jurisdictions. And for the listening public, Redmond is, doing a lot better than all of those cities. So, wanting to make sure that we're communicating this out, is that maybe for the mayor or staff that's listening, just emphasizing in any publications that we're getting this information out as much as possible?
Normal communication process for us is through the mayor's updates. We also send inserts with our utility bills. We also send messages on the utility bill, and we will update our city website.
Thank you.
Just sharing again some key assumptions. I'll hit them when we are looking at some of the graphs. So we're looking at water, wastewater. Just wanted to show council really, what the makeup of our revenue sources is, and the growth that we are experiencing. On the next slide, you'll see how in dollars they compare. This is with the rate recommendations applied. You will see a reduction in grant and miscellaneous revenue. That is due to, in the last biennium, we transferred ARPA dollars into the utility to make up some of the revenue lost due to the pandemic. We no longer have that happening in this biennium. We, when you're looking at rates, we sort of figure out, what is the system going to do on its own before we figure out how much revenues need to grow. So one of the first things we look at is our customer base. Our biggest growing customer class is our multifamily class. The commercial class is also growing, but it is really replacing connections that had once been in place. So we're seeing the Microsoft meters be removed. We went a couple of years without them. They are reconnected and starting to use some capacity. So we had some system change, but the result is we are sort of back where we were. Looking forward on the next slide, we really anticipate more of the same. The one customer class that we do not anticipate growth in is irrigation. Irrigation is really where the risk of the water utility lives. If it's too wet, people don't irrigate. If it's too hot, people can't irrigate. So we're always sort of on the hook for the irrigation dollars. We've also seen historically that the connections in this customer class have decreased as folks are trying to be more environmentally conscious. In looking at demand, this is where it gets a little bit fun. So you can see that the blue line there is commercial, and you can see the dip that we took due to the pandemic. Also happening at the same time was the Microsoft disconnections. We have reestablished the customer class for commercial to where we nearly were during the pandemic. You can also see that we had in the yellow line at the top, that's where we kind of went home to work, and then everyone kind of went back. Kind of looks the same as our liquor and marijuana tax lines, but it's looking forward into the future. On the next slide, it's not as interesting. We really try to normalize it for weather conditions and things like that. But we do expect multifamily to be the largest growing user of water. We have a lot of unoccupied spaces right now, so this represents they're in the base, but they're not yet using water, and we expect some growth there. This is a graph that we like to show. It really demonstrates the growth that we've seen and how we sort of have been able to stay within the same band of water usage. That's because of environmental types of initiatives and conservation. I don't know about my forecasts in the outer years. I'm working with Public Works to understand more sort of what those impacts will be. On the expenditure side, primary driver for the water or wastewater utility is salaries and benefits and the cost to Cascade Water Alliance, as well as those depreciation costs that help to offset expenditures in the capital program. We also pay King County for wastewater treatment. They have their own rate that supports that. The utility tax does place a 0.5% increase on that revenue source as well. So looking at Novelty Hill, I'm just going to go a little bit quicker through here. Again, this is really a lot of the same things that we're seeing, except for when we get to our customer base. You can go a little bit further. We're flatlined. Go back to base. We're flatlined. We're dead. We have no more growth there. We have been at build out in that service area for probably since 2015-16 timeframe. So when we're looking at rate setting, we don't have the benefit of applying growth before we have to apply increases to revenues. Because we haven't really seen growth occur, we also don't really expect demand changes to occur. The biggest risk that we have in Novelty Hill is the golf course. Every time they change ownerships, the next person thinks they know how to do it better, and they try something, and I don't know. So demand will stay sort of flat through this utility. And we are also dealing with the same type of expenditure pressure. It's really salaries and benefits, the cost to Cascade, and again, depreciation. Stormwater is largely fixed rates. We've had some great growth because of development that has occurred, but there's not a lot of risk once we establish what the rates are. We typically, don't have to be worried about whether we will be generating that amount or not. The revenue forecast does include both the increase to the utility tax as well as the revenues that we're growing on our own. Expenditures, again, it's salary and benefits. On the utility side, on the stormwater side, one of the expenditures that we are seeing increase is our overhead. So part of conversations during budget balancing, when looking at environmental sustainability, it was very important for me as part of this budget process to ensure that we had alignment with our direct expenditures as well as the indirect costs. And one of the things that we talked about is the burden of street sweeping. For many years, we have had 2 street sweepers. One is paid for from the general fund and one is split between the general fund and stormwater. We have been experimenting, testing, working with other agencies, using grant revenues to understand what is the benefit of street sweeping on water quality. And we've found that the benefit is there, and it's very high. So you will see in this proposed budget that we are recommending to move to 1 street sweeper paid for by the general fund and 1 street sweeper paid for by the stormwater utility. That creates about $1.5 million of capacity for us in the general fund and really puts that burden where it needs to be. I'm hopeful that this is one of those places that we are able to achieve some grant funding in the future to help us offset that cost. Utility billing impacts, I wanted to make sure that we demonstrated what we expect impacts to be of the changes we've discussed on our average residential customer. We're looking at about $7 per month, $14 per bi-monthly bill that we generate for those customers. I learned something on the next slide that I wanted to share with you. I worked with Public Works this year on the update to the water comp plan. And a part of that asked for rate affordability. And so what I found is that the Washington State Department of Health and the Public Works Association use rate affordability. And it is really the median income in the city of Redmond and the assurance that our utility rates for water are not more than 2% of that. And so I provided that as a guide to let you know sort of where we are in that affordability lens. I thought it was useful information when I was working on the water comp plan and wanted to share that with you. So as far as water goes and the metric that is utilized, we meet that criteria there. Any questions on the utilities? Okay, good.
Councilmember Nueva Camina.
Thank you. It was taking a minute because it was on that last point. Because as soon as I hear median income, I think about all of the households that are well above, and I would say grossly well above those rates. And we're looking at increasing, 2024 being at 172.9, so we'll call that 173, and going up to in 2030, just 6 years, 5 years from now essentially, and going up to, we'll round up to 219. And again, thinking about that is the median household income. And when we're talking about, even going with the low end, at 173 for this year, a lot of our other tools that we have are triggered at a much lower median income because a lot of that is then based on either federal or HUD, right? So we're not really talking about apples to apples. And while that's 2% of median income, when the household income, and I'll say something that isn't so grossly far-fetched in our neighborhoods, is a household income of $500,000. So if we're talking about 2% of median and we're talking about $33 a month, I mean, you know, I can sneeze and 33 is gone. Not that my household is 500,000. However, when then we're talking about a household that still doesn't qualify for any of our triggered vehicles that we would use to support families that are considerably below that, because you can still be considerably below that, say even $100,000 at 73,000, and not trigger any of the support mechanisms that we have, and that still be well above that household's 2%. Now, I understand that it's very complicated, but I also want to make sure that I'm using my privilege on the dais to address that and say, hey, yes, this is median income. And when we're talking about median income, it is a huge swath of household incomes that we're talking about.
We will have an opportunity to discuss exactly that over the next biennium. A lot of the work that Public Works will be doing to establish the future direction of our utility investments will help us to establish where do we go and what conversations do we need to get there to implement. We have operations that we need to support. There's been a lot of growth, a lot of infrastructure that we've built ourselves, a lot of infrastructure that's been contributed by developers. We have CIP needs of our own, capacity that we need to ensure is there, and the planning that he's doing within the Public Works Department will inform where we go with that conversation.
Thank you, and I know this is a very, very complicated, so thank you for contending in the arena as we are wrestling through this.
Council Vice President Forsyth.
Thank you. Councilmember Nueva Camina just hit on one of the things that I've brought up many times. When we're looking at this data and we know what the median is, I also think it would be valuable, and I've said this before, if we could know what the mode is, what the most commonly occurring numbers, so that we have a better picture of what is actually truly representing the majority of our community.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And actually, if we can go back to, perfect, to that slide, just to clarify, the percentages you have down there that, like under 2024, is that 0.01% or is that round to 2%? Okay, so you were looking up at the threshold of 2%, but we're actually at 0.01% or 1.02% almost. Okay, that's helpful. And then can you remind us also on the utilities for the threshold that we have in terms of utility fee assistance?
So we offer a low-income discount, low-income and low-income disabled discount for seniors. And it is a 50% discount on the entire bill. If they don't qualify, we also work very closely with HopeLink to try to get them to the resources that we need.
Thank you. Councilmember Nueva Camina.
And when we're talking about low income, again, what charts are we using?
I need to verify for you. I believe that it is at the HUD numbers, but I want to check, and I will email you tomorrow.
My concern is that if you're making $73,000 in the city of Redmond, you may not qualify if we're going off of federal numbers. I know, especially with a lot of programs that we have, they are triggered. I'm looking for another word because I don't like using that particular word. So if anybody has one, please let me know. Where it will activate, and that basis is usually off of a federal poverty line, which is also used for free and reduced lunch. And if we take a look at that number, it's like ballpark of $40,000. And again, like to be able to qualify for that, you know, it's questionable as how are you even here in Redmond? And I know that many of our families are quite resourceful. And again, talking about those families that are 100,000 under median income and being at 73,000.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I see no other questions if you want to continue.
Okay, so we're back at the capital investment program, and nothing has changed, except for the last slide where I tell you where the changes are. So here's our assumptions. The revenues, these are our final numbers. comparisons, nothing we haven't talked about, except for this. So as part of developing the capital investment program, Director Burt has identified things in his arena that he would like to address, study, improve. One of the things that he wanted to move forward with at this point was putting a new contingency procedure policy in place. I wouldn't say that this is our procedure or policy, but it is a beginning point for him to understand where we're at and what is appropriate for us. We went through an exercise with the Public Works Department and looked at each project and reduced the contingencies down to 15 to 20% based on risk and what we currently know, except for any projects that we knew had really high risk, and so those were kept in place. That allowed me to then move on to the next change, which is increasing the budget that is identified for the Maintenance and Operations Center up from $150 million to $225 million. Part of that utilized the dollars from the redistribution or reduction of the contingency. And some of that is due to changes in our forecast that we were able to reallocate to these projects. Other projects had changed and we had resources to apply. It certainly does at this point include the possibility of a debt issuance. As I said earlier, I feel as though we are looking at probably some type of a facilities package, or we may choose to focus on a package for transportation dollars, which would then free up $125 million. There is a lot to know about this project, but I just wanted to keep you up to date. The other thing that contingency reductions were used for was to begin developing reserves within our capital investment programs. That is something that follows the proviso that was in place and also my anxiety. So we are focusing on facilities. We have reserves in place for City Hall, and we are sort of expanding the scope of those to include other buildings. I'm working to try and put together funding for the senior center. We started off that building with no reserves, so I'm working to build those up as we go as well. On the utility side, we were very successful in implementing reserves as well as a continuous influx into that reserve to help offset pipe replacement projects that we know have been deferred and are waiting for us. So 3 changes that I just want to make sure that you are aware of. Numbers will look different. I have been able to utilize those reductions to move a couple of other things that were important to the city forward. And that is all I have for you until we talk about deliberations, next steps.
I'll pause here for a moment just to ask, are there any questions from the council on any of the information presented thus far? Councilmember Fields.
So if I had to summarize a couple of key points or themes, it would be you've worked really hard to create alignment of what, not only on the revenue side of where the revenue should come from and who should pay based on the services, but also alignment of where the charges should exist. And I really, truly appreciate that, because without that, it's very difficult to move forward. this is more of a question than a statement. It feels like on utilities, we're leveraging some of our recent building from a density perspective. We're getting more volume and not necessarily the outlays that we might have seen relational in the past. Is that a somewhat of a true statement?
I think that you could say that. There is some data that I have that I would like to share with you, and I can't call it up right now, but in essence, we have been seeing that trend happening, and we're trying to correct for it.
Okay. And then the third thing is what you were just talking about, and, you know, financial conservatism, having contingencies, the right contingencies and reserves in place is really important because there's always surprises. There's always things that 225 might be 275.
No.
I don't know.
No, it's not, Mr. Burt.
All right. What I've often wondered about the city, and I don't know if now's the time, but I would like for Director Burt and maybe Director Helen at some point to show that we have in fact kept pace in these infrastructure needs. We are growing quite a bit. I'm seeing more buildings that don't have people in them yet. I don't know what that is going to mean to the tension of services and maintaining services. So I share I shouldn't say share, I have a sort of an intuitive concern of, did we in fact keep pace with growth? Did we in fact keep pace with infrastructure?
No.
Okay, thanks for heightening my concern.
You're welcome. So that is exactly what Director Byrd is trying to establish. We've tried to have this conversation a lot of times and trying to figure out how do you determine the level of staffing. And there are KPIs that you can use to help inform that. And we didn't have the benefit of having those things in place. So what he's going to be doing is really working to establish where are we and where do we need to go type of plan.
Somewhat a gap analysis of some kind. All right, great, thank you.
Welcome.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, if we could go to slide 18. And while we go, I just want to say it's so very clear to me that Kelly and Haritha and team are the right people at the right time in the right roles. And I'm so excited to go through this process with you all. Thank you. There was so much good information in here. And what I'm most proud about is the wisdom, I would say, in some of the suggestions and recommendations that you're sharing with us, because it's about putting the right puzzle piece in the right place in order to produce the best possible outcome. And for me, this chart on slide 18 is home base. So one of my takeaways, to borrow the language of my colleague, is the forecast here for 24 and 25 and getting toward 26, it is our job as a council to be making sure that one line doesn't go below the other and to get those flipped. And I think what I'm hearing is that, this is still going to be a hard challenge, but using all the tools that we have and using them correctly is going to give us a shot at flipping these lines in the next biennium, and that's what I'm really excited about. So throughout the whole next process, this is home base for me, influencing so that when we're here in 2 years, that we don't have the wrong line underneath the other one, because what we're about to go into is a pretty pleasant process compared to some of the prior cycles, just given what was going on in the world too. So thank you so much for all your work on this. Very excited.
Yes.
Mayor Bernie.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the frustrations I've had is that there are so many grants and opportunities that come across in my email and conferences we go to, and we want to ensure that as a city we are applying and and getting as many of those opportunities to fund our city through other sources outside of our tax base that we have. And so I think you will be pleasantly surprised or pleased in the budget to see some of the investments that we're going to make. I mean, I think, I don't have the stats on the top of my head, but our lobbyist that we have for the city that does state lobbying for us, the return on investment is pretty incredible with her work and the work with the city. So those are the kinds of things that I think is extremely important that we make sure we're investing in.
Thank you so much.
To walk through the budget process, I have suggested that instead of discussing each enhancement kind of line by line, that we actually look at our enhancements through the lens of packages. There are certain things that we do that work together. So an example of that would be the utility planning that we're doing. There would be a package that would show the staffing and the studies that are needed in order to do that. We are also going to show you what happens after this biennium. So you'll be able to see what's queued up for 25 and 26 and what we anticipate will be actions after that, or things that will bleed from one biennium to another. A lot of our conversation in this biennium, it wasn't about yes or no. It was about whether or not it was the right thing at the right time. So why and why now types of questions. And that allowed us to sort of move things to a future biennium and help to develop a basis of a plan for the future budgets that we can then start working that plan. So I want to make sure that council's okay with sort of looking at the budget in not such small increments, kind of at a higher level, talking about what we need for the utilities, what we need for the environmental sustainability action plan. Does that work?
Councilmember Stewart.
I love it. This is so exciting. No, this is so exciting because you lose the thread when you're down in the weeds. So for the new council members, the way we did it last time is we had the budget and literally went like page by page for every single budget offer. And this will give us a chance to look at it at a programmatic view. And the preview that you're offering for the future biennia, that's just going to make us all better at our jobs. So thank you.
You're welcome.
And I will note that I was able to look with Council Vice President Forsyth and Councilmember Fields at some examples of the types of summaries and slides that we're going to see, and I think it's going to be really exciting for facilitating discussion. One other note that I wanted to make just on the budget process that's here is that the 21st is currently scheduled as a special meeting on a Thursday. There is actually a business meeting that Tuesday, which is actually also the time we're scheduled to adopt the Redmond 2050 plan. If on the 14th we're all ready to adopt by the next week, we could put it onto the business meeting instead of on the 21st. I think probably I've talked about this with Council Vice President Forsyth, that, once we get into the first couple of these budget sessions and we get a sense of how many more meetings we're going to need and if we'll stay on track, we could look at scheduling that so that we could do the process more efficiently if needed. And let's say the process goes even longer, we also have some buffer because obviously you can imagine there are some meetings in here in between, but the hopes would be that we could stick to this schedule and hopefully, if things are going well, to be able to actually adopt at that business meeting on the 19th. But if we do have it on the 21st, one thing we've discussed is that we could add a public comment option on that time, just in case people want to comment on our budget before we pass it, since it's a Thursday special meeting and won't be a business meeting when we would normally have public comment. Councilmember Stewart.
That was a lot of information, and I get that there's maybe some pieces that fit together really well. Could you include that for consideration in your next weekly leadership update or something to have it in writing so we can all evaluate it?
Yes, happy to do so.
Thanks.
And again, this schedule you see before us is the schedule. I just wanted to give people some insight into some of the planning that we've been thinking about in terms of it. I think it's only contingent upon the budget process going as smoothly as is laid out. So just wanted to let council members know. Councilmember Salahuddin.
Yeah, there's no time for the 11:14 or 11:21. Would that also be 6 p.m. or 7?
It's currently in the extended agenda.
Oh, awesome.
I believe it's a 6 p.m. meeting, but I have to look at it. So, but yeah, all of the currently scheduled meetings are in the extended agenda, everything that's on here. Mayor Bernie?
So I just want to share, very excited to see this a much more condensed schedule than what we've had in the past, in part because we've had the briefing tonight. We're going to go over some other things that are going to be in the budget. We have been working really hard this year to take all of your considerations, the ask that the council has. So not much of this will be a surprise when you do see the final budget, because there are things that we've been talking about all year. And so I'm optimistic. I would even say, hopefully, you might not even need the 14th, but you know, who am I to say that? I'm not the council. But it would be, I think it would be a pretty phenomenal night to be able to adopt the comp plan and the budget the same night too. So throw that out as a target, but appreciate also ensuring that you have enough time to discuss and think and have the deliberations that you need. But that would be pretty cool.
Council Vice President Forsyth.
Just for clarity, on the extended agenda, we have the 12th meeting, special meeting starting at 6. The 14th, that Thursday, would also be at 6. The 17th, or the 19th, is a regular business meeting at 7. And if we go to the 21st, it is also on a Thursday at 7. So a little bit of time shift towards the end of November. Otherwise, mostly 6 o'clock.
Councilmember Fields.
Yeah, I just want to comment. I share the mayor's optimism about getting through this budget process. I think the fact that we have had a lot of input throughout the year, and I believe that the mayor and the mayor's staff has listened to council over the past couple of years on how to improve this process. In particular, Director Cochran, amazing. You should get a medal of some kind. I'll figure it out. But I also want to say to my colleagues on the council, there is no, because we are optimistic about being able to have this discussion, that does not mean that we don't want to hear everything that we need to hear. This is, I had this discussion with Marcioni years ago. He thinks that the comp plan is the most important policy statement. I still say that the budget is the most important policy statement. Doesn't really matter. It's an important policy statement. So, especially for new council members, ask questions. Don't our optimism, don't let that dissuade you from using that time. So that's all.
Thank you, Councilmember Fields. And I'm not sure if I'm going to step on your toes on a future slide, but I did want to also bring up that Director Cochran sent out, based on previous ground rules we'd use for budget processes, an updated set for 25 to 26 budget deliberations. Hopefully, council members were able to review that, but we are hoping that at the beginning of the budget process, which as a reminder, Councilmember Fields as our FAC chair will be facilitating. We're going to want to agree upon those. So if there are any issues or questions about those rules, which I think are the same as we used the last biennium, please let us know or bring it up so that way we can kind of get a good start to the budget process and have some clear ground rules that Councilmember Fields can use to chair that process.
It'll be an agenda item at FAC where we can just check them off, edit, and we should be ready to go.
Mayor Bernie.
There we go. I want to follow up on what Councilmember Fields said, because that is extremely important. So yes, I do not want to shortchange the process whatsoever. I want to ensure that all the council members have the opportunity to get all their questions answered in the way that they need to. And with that, I want to share with the newer council members and all the council members that once you receive the budget, as you work through it, please reach out to staff if you have questions. So you don't have to wait till the budget sessions that we have laid out. It's really important for you to get clarity on things. Still ask those questions in session as well, but really we are here for you to ensure that you understand what we're bringing forward. And we're all in this to make sure the city's doing great things. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you do have questions, because we just want it to be a really good process for everybody.
Council Vice President Forsyth.
I just wanted to say thank you to Kelly and her team, because the way that this was laid out in the little meeting that we had in advance and what you've shown here, it is exciting, because this is really taking a very holistic view of all the programs, how we're actually going to achieve our goals in a way that we've never done before. So I just want to commend you for that, because it was a huge lift in and of itself and challenging our expectations, and I think you've exceeded. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And I will just echo that and say we're incredibly lucky to have you as our finance director and to have Ms. Nora on our team just doing an amazing job, and our whole finance staff. So, I know that Councilmember Fields will give us time at the beginning of the process to grandstand and thank, but I think a little extra thank you is always in order. All right, is there any more on this item? All right, council members, are there any other discussion topics on this item? As noted, the next item is somewhat linked to this, and there were a couple topics that'll come up in that item if we want to move on. Okay, seeing no objection, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda. I'll introduce it and give some of the staff time to come up who will be joining us for this. The next item on the agenda is public safety funding. It's the topic of this was listed as the Public Safety Funding Council Subcommittee briefing. I will note that this is actually intended to be updates from both subcommittees, and really to talk about what we want to fund and how we'll fund public safety. And we have both Daryl Loeb, our police chief, as well as Kelly Cochran, our finance director, who will introduce this item, and we're also joined by Chief Shepard, our fire chief, as well. Thank you all for being here, and go ahead, Director Cochran, I imagine.
I would like that. If you could just give me a moment. My computer is doing its own thing.
All right, well, we'll give it a moment.
Okay.
Do you need a moment of recess, or are you good? Okay.
It's always my computer.
While you're pulling that up, I will just give a quick reminder to the public that during this item tonight, we'll be discussing some outcomes of conversations from two subcommittees that the council formed this year. This came out of our council retreat that we had early this year, where we identified some key topics that we really wanted to focus on, and we wanted to give council members the opportunity to talk offline with staff and go more into depth than we sometimes have time for in our meetings. As many of you may know, we are bound by the Open Public Meetings Act, which ensures that we do our work transparently in the public eye, but we are allowed to have meetings with smaller groups of council members, less than a quorum, to discuss issues, as long as we ensure that only those council members have spoken, and that's part of why we established subcommittees. One, to look at the vision around alternative crisis response and thinking about what we would want to design in terms of scaling up those efforts, and the other in terms of assessing all the different ways we would fund a variety of issues related to public safety. So we had a couple council members that were involved in that. In the Alternative Crisis Response Committee, we had Council Vice President Forsyth, Council Member Nueva Camina, and Council Member Salahuddin. And in the Public Safety Funding Committee, I served on that committee along with Council Member Stewart and Council Member Salahuddin, noting that Council Member Salahuddin was the overlapping member, which is very fitting given that he's our Public Safety Committee chair. So just we'll give that context while you're getting this pulled up, and to say that since we do take great pains to not do business out of the public view, these everyone except for those small committees have not really heard that much about what each committee has been discussing. So the goal was to come up with some ideas and then come and pitch them to the broader council, and then get bigger council decisions and feedback. So tonight is the chance for us to actually do that, and especially for those subcommittees to have had the conversations with our staff and really brainstormed the best ideas to bring forward to the council. So I just want to also say thank you to the staff that have spent many hours in conversation with the council, and I will kick it back to you.
Good evening. So the agenda that we have for you this evening is first to talk about filling the public safety funding gap, to talk about the enhancements for the police department's budget, the enhancements for the fire department engine company, and then potential funding options and impacts. So in the public safety funding option discussions, we'll talk about filling the public safety funding gap and identify how that will be achieved. We'll look at the different revenue options, the police department strategic plan, the fire department strategic plan, Fire Station 17 recommended options, the alternative crisis care, impacts of the recommended options, and other potential funding options. I shouldn't be. Because I'm not in the meeting. Okay. As far as the alternative crisis response discussion, we're looking at funding additional mental health professional and support through a social worker and a peer counselor, the governance of that additional staff into our program. I'll say the operational aspects of dispatching versus self-selecting the calls, the safety protocol, training and equitable data collection, the branding and the uniforms, and the community engagement. So this represents the items that were discussed in the subcommittee that will lead and contribute to the discussion that we'll have tonight.
Chief Lowe, I'll just have you pause there, because I think it'd be great for the members of the subcommittee to share a little bit with the rest of the council about some of these items that were discussed and some of the thinking that you came to as up to date as part of those discussions. Who'd like to lead us off?
So you want to go through the list?
Yeah, do we want to, we'll start with alternative crisis response.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so initially, and just to clarify, while I was on both subcommittees, I made sure to not disclose to the other subcommittee what we were discussing. So one of the primary purposes of this subcommittee was looking at those additional mental health professionals and supporting social workers and peer counselors, in that we really wanted to make sure that Redmond had Susie Kroll as our mental health professional, and she has since gone to King County, and that position has been left open. So we really want to make sure that we are actively recruiting and filling that position, making sure that we're supporting our response model and supplementing that with additional FTEs, which we'll see later on in the proposal.
And then we also discussed on the governance piece, both the council's wishes as well as a lot of feedback from the community to have the governance move from policing over towards fire, but also looking at that we don't have the infrastructure and the budget to be able to make that large of a shift at this moment. So then taking a look at, well, where is that governance going to lie? And the conversation that we had was that it would then be governed by the executive office and fall under human services.
Yeah, and along with the governance portion of the conversation, we looked at how the dispatch would work and how the self-selection would work. So dispatch will still be run through the 911 system, through PD, and the ability for our responders, our mental health crisis responders, to self-select to a call. Let's say they see a name pop up through the dispatch system that it's someone that they know, that they'll be able to tag themselves onto that call and make sure that they're doing that follow-up work with the folks that they know, or if they see a situation emerging that they know that their services could be of potential help, they have that ability. And then the safety and training protocols, this was one that I was hoping Chief Lowe could elaborate a bit on, as my memory was failing me, and when we discussed this prior to this, we needed some help on that one.
So from the safety protocols perspective, once we stand up the program, there will be criteria both for the alternative response, I'll call it unit and or team, and the uniformed police officers that would support them. They would be provided the appropriate training, I'll say outside of what their mental health and crisis response training is, and as far as dealing with individuals in crisis. But I'll say the safety protocol is similar to what we would give, police officers or civilian police staff.
Thank you. And then we also talked a lot about equitable data collection and making sure that the data we collect goes into those dashboards that we currently have, that we're creating a section for our mental health capacity, and that we're really looking at the equitable outcomes that reflect our community, that are our numbers actually representative of what our community is. So making sure that we're collecting that data, but also presenting it back to the community in a way that makes sense.
Along the lines of communicating, we had a great deal of conversation around what does branding and uniforms communicate to the community? What does it look like when a particular uniform will show up? And what we found is that the community isn't so much reactive to a uniform, but different types of uniforms. So making sure that we're being sensitive towards that, to where we're not having any confusion, so that when they see a particular color of a shirt or a jacket, whatever it is, that they know, okay, this is here for my safety, to help me. They're here to help, and have a different listening for each branded uniform. One of the big concerns was having exterior vests and it looking like a member of our police department, and not wanting that, and making sure that there was a very clear distinction between the two.
Then just to wrap up, I know Councilmember Fields raised his hand, but on the community engagement portion, we spoke about a community advisory committee that would be appointed by council, a new separate committee that would be defining a collective agreement on roles, responsibilities, and the processes of what this would entail, which would really hone in on what we're focused on, the culturally appropriate responses, especially given our growing diverse community, making sure that that's run through a process that's a separate advisory committee.
Well, thank you so much for all of that work and for the recap on the discussions. That's really helpful. I think there's a few questions potentially. Councilmember Fields?
Thank you. So am I understanding this right, that this is independent of the police department? They direct themselves, they work in partnership with the police and the fire department, but they under the, I think you said HR, or who?
Human resources, human services.
Human services, right. So under the human services department, they are self-directing, determining what their protocols are, what their procedures are, how they work together, how they identify themselves, and they work in conjunction with the police and fire department, but they're not under the police and fire department. Is that what you guys all said? Just want to be clear on that.
Not quite. So the governance aspect, the ability for the policy to be set, needs to be housed. When we were looking at the STAR program, which is what this is based off of, which Chief Lowe has said for many years, this would be based off the Denver STAR program. Their program is housed within their human services element, so that policy direction is set through. We have the ability to set that policy direction. So those roles will be, while they will be housed under human services, they still follow the safety protocols that the chief laid out, and the dispatch and all that still goes through 911. So it's a collaborative process. And you can jump in here, Chief Lowe, if I'm missing anything. I'm sure I'm missing a couple elements.
Thank you. Mayor Bernie, would you like to jump in? Then we'll have Chief Lowe share a little bit about the vision.
Briefly, just as a reminder, they are staff of the city, which means they're under my, they're staff of mine, of the cities. And so I think some of these details will have to be worked out, what the council's role is, what the policy directions are versus what the role of the administration is. So I think that has not been worked out yet, to answer somewhat of your question.
Thank you. And and I am curious to hear from Chief Lowe, just in terms of the actual staffing proposal that we have tonight. Is that assuming that some of those FTEs that are showing up here would go under human services, or would they, for this upcoming budget, go under police and then move to human services?
As long as we fund and staff the FTEs, we will stand the program up. As far as if they go to human services or if they show up in the human services budget line, that's fine. As far as the function and operation part or piece of it, yes, it will be modeled in large part after Denver STAR program as far as the call screening protocol that will occur from the police department side. And I would say it would be very similar to the current model that we have right now with Tiza. She's in human services, but she has a police radio. She gets dispatched and or hears the types of calls that come out, and then can self-select or self-respond as appropriate. So it would be an expansion of the existing model that we currently have in place.
Thank you. Other questions from council members? Councilmember Anderson?
Is there a definition of crisis?
Yes, I'm sure there is. I couldn't tell you what it is off the top of my head, but essentially if someone calls and they have a need, for service.
But they have to call.
I'm sorry?
They have to call.
They can call, a family member can call, a neighbor can call, but yes, we have to be notified in order to know to send a resource to a location.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you again to the subcommittee for this work and thinking this through. And based on the actual number of FTEs that we understood would be recommended, the funding subcommittee looked at the ways to fund those along with recommendations from this committee that we'll look at later. Before we move on to that, actually, I did have one question just on the follow-up on the actual plan for this for the committee. Is there a plan to have like a written have this written up at some point and transmitted to the council? And what's the thoughts on timing for that? Is it that we would fund it during this upcoming budget and then we would build it during 2025? I just wanted to be clear for the listening public on what order in which we'll develop that.
Yeah, if we get really down into the weeds of operationally how this will likely transpire, yes, I guess the ask is to fund it as proposed in the budget. We would then hire the MHP person first to then help build out the job spec and the program for the other two parts, and to bring it operational or online at some point in 2025, probably the middle to latter part, with the mental health professional being the first hire in this process.
Great, thank you. And then, and we'll get to the exact which hires we're talking about and which numbers. But last question is, in terms of the collaboration with other potential jurisdictions like RACER, is the thought from the subcommittee that we would start by continuing to scale ours up while we're waiting for the opportunity to join and look at that in the future? Or is it that we'll just go on our own ongoing?
I think a lot of that largely depends on our growth. RACER at this point, it does not have the capacity for us. We are going to continue growing at a pace. So even if RACER said, okay, we're ready for you, our concern is that our growth will have outpaced it, and then they're not going to be ready for us. So looking at how can we still be thinking forward-wise about a regional approach and understanding that we're not there yet. So looking towards a regional approach, but at this moment, we need something right now.
Great, thank you. Councilmember Salahuddin?
Yeah, exactly what Councilmember Nueva Camina just mentioned. With the position not being filled for quite some time, I've talked to the chief about this, and that we just need something as soon as possible in a way that puts our city first, maintaining our residents' health and safety without waiting for whatever a decision regionally might be. And I think that putting this through our city, through the resources that we've had, and huge kudos to the staff for figuring out both the funding model, but also the response models. I think we can be a model in ourselves to be able to work this scenario out. So that's where we're at, sort of in terms of the regional versus city response.
Thank you so much. Council Vice President Forsyth.
To add on to that, the way that we've talked about this, if the opportunity for RACER were to come available, we've kind of structured this in a way that's very similar to what they're already doing with the uniform branding, the self-select, the governance aspect, and the folks that we're going to be hiring on. It's all very similar to what's happening in RACER. So if the programs were to merge, that could be one thing. If we were to stand up our own, that's another. So we kind of left some wiggle room for our growth.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That answers my questions. Let's move on to the funding pieces, and then we can discuss holistically everything that's proposed here. I'll put it back to our finance director.
Good evening again. So this will pull together some of the talking points from the previous presentation and allow you to see what the full funding package for the public safety gap is. I think the starting point for this committee work was to really sort of figure this out. It's the basis that we need in order to add the other elements onto it. We are looking at a $6 million gap that exists in the fire levy fund and in the police levy fund. And in order to close that, the following revenues have been identified. So there is, in conversation with council, and I believe on its way to moving forward, is the implementation of transport fees. Those are in direct alignment with the services that are provided. The next two items are capital expenditures that I would like to align with other capital expenditures in the CIP and utilize, again, the method of using one-time dollars to allow ongoing dollars in the general fund to be available to offset these costs. The lease for the Redmond Community Center at Marymore Village is essentially a capital lease. We are in right now leasing a building, and we know that within the next few years, we need to determine what our long-term plan is for that building. You will see in the budget that we will begin working on the facility strategic plan, as well as a plan for community centers within Redmond. And this will lead to sort of the replacement of this lease payment with either another lease payment or potentially the purchase of something for us to move forward with. So this is moving a capital expense into the CIP. It's similar in nature to how we handle debt. It's not something we capitalize. It is something that is expensed out of what we call a major maintenance fund. So it's the same recommendation for this lease payment as it is for the City Hall debt expense. And the last piece that is applied is a portion of the growth that we're seeing in sales tax, just directly applied to help clear the way.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you so much, Director Cochran. And just for the members of the council who were not on the committee and for the listening public, this is another one of those examples where we also heard some recommendations in the prior presentation that to me feels like really wise uses of putting the right puzzle piece in the right place. So when the subcommittee was first authorized, if you will, at our council retreat last February, our main concern was making sure that we were going to close the gap because the public safety levy had not passed the last time we went to the ballot. And so this gap, when we say we're this gap, it's because of the failure of that levy lid lift. And so this is a really elegant solution, and I'm happy to support it.
Councilmember Fields.
Yeah, first off, I'm glad that we're not doing a levy. But Director Cochran, can you convince me that there's not a whack-a-mole situation here where the funding for City Hall capital expenses and the lease doesn't create a problem somewhere else?
It doesn't. So let's go back to City Hall. So City Hall, the way that the funding goes is it's funded from construction sales tax. So we have construction sales tax that we recognize as ongoing. It sits in the general fund, and that's what that's been drawing from. We also have sales tax on construction that comes in and is transferred to the CIP, and that is what we would be paying this debt out of. Earlier in the forecast presentation, I shared the forecast for one-time construction sales tax going forward, and there is capacity to pay that.
So the 1.108 is part of that. Thank you.
Welcome.
All right, why don't you continue on since it's already 10:17, so
Right.
move along here, and then we'll take more questions.
Okay, so there were discussions held within the committees to discuss the implementation of a utility tax on our own utilities, which again, we currently do not have. Discussion about business license increases, voter-approved public safety sales tax, or taking forward a property levy lid lift. Where we have landed with some other enhancements that we are working on in police. We are moving forward with a recommendation in the budget to add 4 police officers, so you'll see that come through. 2 funded by Sound Transit and 2 funded by growth in the general fund. We have funded the body-worn camera program on an ongoing basis. The one-time money that we put into reserves and have been feeding that program off of will run out at the end of '25, and we've got ongoing sources in place. So to implement the recommendation that is in place to hire a mental health professional, there has been a proposal put on the table to increase our business license fee by an additional $30. The additional request to bring in 2 social workers, the plan there is to work to achieve some grant funding that can be used to offset that expense. So we're talking about business license increase to pay for the mental health professional.
And just to be clear, the mental health professional would be an additional one on top of the existing mental health professional position we have. So that would be increasing that. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. Director Cochran, we have a different number in our packet, so I just want to reference the mental health professional, the increase. In our packet, it says $2.33.
Oh, but that's something else. I will verify for you, but
So for the moment, we have some amount of recommendation.
I believe this is right.
Okay.
I believe that, so Aretha took a look at this with me this afternoon. She may have changed this, but this is the amount for this, for the mental health professional.
Okay, great.
It is
Thank
not
you.
as high as it was originally stated.
Great. Thank you.
All right, why don't you continue? There may be a few more potential changes from what we see in our packet, and hopefully our finance director can explain those as well.
The next objective was to put an engine company at Station 17. That would include 4 firefighters. It has some ongoing costs as well as some one-time costs. The funding proposal, sorry, this is not my profession. Okay, so I think that the total funding proposal for both packages is the mental health professional, and I don't know why that says $1.29, and then the firefighters. Okay. Firefighters, what we had teed up for you to review tonight was a proposal that included a 1% utility tax on the city's utilities, as well as an additional increase for the business license fee. What I have learned or reviewed since I've had the opportunity to discuss the proposal with council is that in order to cover the firefighters, we really only need to implement the utility tax for that. There is enough capacity remaining that is unallocated in the general fund budget that if we combine that with the amount of the utility tax, it garners enough to support the 4 FTEs. So what this proposal would look like would be the $1.30 for the additional business license increase and a 1% utility tax to offset the firefighters. We do not need an additional increase on business license to offset the firefighters.
Thank you. And are you going to follow up on the next slides, or are those available for us to discuss more in detail?
I can keep going.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, go ahead.
It's just a little bit more detail. So I don't know why these numbers are all over the place, so I apologize. But it's $1.30 that is needed for the MHP. The utility tax increase does allow the collection of a little over 1.1 million for the biennium, 564,000 annually. Again, it's not a tax that we have in place. Business license, again, we do not need the increase for the firefighters. So that would be our recommendation, is increase to the business license fee and the utility tax. Funding impacts, the utility tax, I would recommend that we split that increase over the biennium and allow minimal impacts to ratepayers. The business license fee as well would be something that we would implement in 2025. It will bring the cost up to proposed for so we're adding a cost of $3.59 per FTE on top of our existing license fee.
Councilmember Salahuddin?
That would be
Yeah.
359 minus like the 150. Yeah.
$1.30.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. And
It's a lot of numbers here.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So utility tax, 1%, phased in, business license increase of $1.30 to cover the MHP.
Maybe we'll just pause here. We can step back unless we want to go into more detail. We can go into detail as council members have questions on this. I will note, I think in terms of the public safety that have been figured out how to be funded, really these are the decisions we'd have to make in terms of potential increases in business license fee as well as utility tax if we wanted to be able to fund this. I did want to give just a moment before we jump in on the discussion around this funding for our fire chief to just briefly speak to what we heard about in the subcommittee about the importance of Fire Station 17. I think we spent a lot of time looking at the funding gap for public safety, talking about the general idea of how many of us wanted to fund mental health professionals and scale up our alternative crisis response, and also heard a lot attached to the materials was a white paper about the importance of Fire Station 17, and we really felt that we needed to get going on that this biennium and starting next year. So maybe we can just hear briefly about that from our fire chief before we begin the discussion.
Oh, absolutely, and good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Just to lend some context to the proposal, has been mentioned already this evening. Redmond is experiencing incredible growth, and that will continue. And with that growth, we know that we're going to have, daily commuter traffic coming in, that increase, and then of course an increase in our service demands. That being said, we aligned our decision-making with our strategic plan and with our standard of cover. And these are measures on deployment of our resources to make sure that we're actually having the outcomes that we expect. Of course, the city of Redmond expects a high level of service. We want to continue to be able to provide that service. So inside this the proposal, what we're really looking at is trying to increase our ability to respond to affected areas. Station 17 currently is not staffed to actually have a fire engine. And for those listening out there in TV land, a fire engine is different than a fire truck. A fire engine carries water and is staffed and actually can do suppression capabilities. We do not have that capability right now here in the city of Redmond at Station 17. We would like to have that. We know that if we do have that, that engine staffed at Station 17, we will be able to really delve into providing more services to that affected area, the northeast portion of Redmond, where there is an increase in service calls. We recognize that. What was mentioned earlier too was regarding the geographic area, some of the risks that are associated to that. And when we look at Station 17's district, we know that we have not only the urban growth, but we also have the wildland-urban interface. And that's something that we paid a lot of attention to over the past 3.5 years that I've been here. We're making more than certain that we're attentive to that. Having water capabilities up there, pump capabilities, we know that we're going to be better responders. Improved response times, this is how we have better outcomes, making more than certain that people can survive.
Can you pause a moment?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And I'll call for that. Thanks, Mayor Bernie. I'm chairing this meeting. Thank you. Is there a motion to extend the meeting by 20 minutes?
So moved.
So second? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
I oppose.
Any abstentions? All right. It passes. Or did you abstain or?
I abstained. I was going to motion to amend or do 15 minutes instead.
Okay. So I guess I guess we'll have to do a vote. If everyone can raise their hand who says aye, please say aye. Aye. Okay, it passes. So we'll continue for 20 minutes. Please continue.
Okay. I'll try and go quickly here. So improved response times, not only in Station 17's district, but also we are in contract with Fire District 34. Currently, they have to make calls into our city. We actually have to pay back that money. This year, we'll be writing District 34 a check of approximately $800,000. So we will essentially start to, we won't nullify it, but we'll chew away at that cost. Obviously, there are going to be times when they have to respond in, but it gives us the capability not only to handle calls in our district, but also handle calls inside Fire District 34. So we think it will end up being a net positive in that regard. I think I already talked about those improved response times, but ultimately, having a staffed engine at Station 17 will result in better outcomes for our community members and better suppression capabilities, not only in that district, but actually in the downtown area as they respond as a second due engine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I think many of our community members don't realize that even though we have that beautiful station, that it doesn't have sufficient staffing to be able to serve our community. So our subcommittee felt that it would be worth it to be able to identify the revenue to make sure that we could start staffing it and following some of the plan that was laid out in the attached white paper. So with that, given that it's getting a little late, I will ask council members whether the ideas presented tonight, whether there's any major objection to the ideas presented tonight, and any questions. Council Vice President Forsyth.
I appreciate the work that's gone into this. I'm supportive of as laid out, but I would ask that the presentation with the numbers that we saw is actually updated into Granicus, that we actually have those numbers to review.
Councilmember Stewart.
Well, thanks, everybody. It's clearly been a few months of really intentional thought. When it comes to the total funding proposal, what we're looking at here on the screen, I'm very much in favor of adding those staff at Station 17 so that we can have more than an aid car running out of that really well-located fire station and making good on our standards of cover, which this council studied fairly recently. I'm also in favor of adding on an additional mental health professional. I have some lingering questions, and I think the council president's proposal was a really good one. If the subcommittee could draft a one-pager to help us understand some of what we have on this slide is just the topics that were discussed, and then I tried to take some notes, but I would really want to make sure that I'm understanding your proposal. But regardless, I think that adding another mental health professional to the city resources right now is just a really good idea. We've had this long vacancy, so of course having some redundancy, but also the growth. And we never once had a conversation with Susie Kroll that ended with like, gosh, I don't think she has enough work. So to me, this seems like a really reasonable total package moving forward, and it looks like from the numbers we'll have to play around with them a little bit with the updated numbers, but the situation financially is even better than we expected it to be. So that is where I'm at. I had one more lingering thought. Guess it wasn't that important, but thank you for your work, everybody.
Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Salahuddin.
Just chime in really briefly. Just want to highlight, again, Director Cochran's work for identifying funds that really alleviated a lot of the pressures on what community members have expressed in, overburdening taxation. And so looking at, decreased utility rates, we're increasing them, but a decreased rate from what was initially proposed, as well as eliminating even that secondary business license tax. Really appreciate that work, as well as both Chief Lowe and Chief Shepard and all of your staff. Thank you for working really hard on these proposals as well.
Councilmember Fields.
So you're asking us if we agree that these items, both the new expenditures and the solutions that the Finance Department came up with to fund them be included in the budget proposal?
Yes.
I have no problem with that. I would like to get this Denver Star program document and maybe even a small description of how it relates to what we're going to do.
Great. All right, I'm not seeing other objections over this, so I think we can do that. I also do want to clarify again, since we went over it quickly, that in addition to the mental health professional, there's also 2 additional social workers that'll be proposed as part of the budget. They're just going to be funded by other sources, so we're focusing on the things that would need new special revenue sources. And also to clarify that we wouldn't necessarily now at this point have to go out for a levy for public safety, but we can have discussions about any future things going forward, but that's essentially what this proposal says. So if the council wanted to look at that in the future for funding, they could, but for now we have decided to go this route. So hopefully that provides you with direction in advance of the budget, and we'll look forward to having it delivered October 1st at the business meeting. Next Tuesday. With that, if there's no other comments, I will just add to my thanks for, especially to our chiefs for the work on this, and our deputy chiefs for their work who engaged in the meetings as well, and to our mayor and other staff. Mayor Bernie?
And I just wanted to thank, she's on vacation, but our COO, Melissa Files, who actually wrangled all of this, and she really did a lot of the work, even though she can't be here tonight for us to say thank you to her, but she really did an amazing job on pulling all this together.
Thank you. All right, with that, we'll close out this item, and we'll move towards the last item on our agenda to close out council talk with council talk time. So on council talk time, we do have quite a few items that were submitted for the hopper. I'm going to suggest to the council, since it is pretty late, that we either choose a limited number or we decide to have the hopper discussions next time. There are quite a few proposals on the docket. So before we get into talking about the hopper, I do want to take a moment to remind the listening public that this upcoming Monday, September 30th, we have council conversations, which is a special meeting of the city council. So you can expect to have a quorum of your city council members there. Hopefully all of us will be there to be able to do roundtable discussions in the park. It's going to be 2 hours from 5 to 7 p.m. And we'll have special, you can come talk about topics such as housing, environment, public safety, transportation. We'll even have an Ask Me Anything type of table. And council members, just so you know, we are planning to do this kind of a speed dating type of format where it won't be that fast, but we'll each get to sit at a table. People can ask us questions. We can chat for about 20 minutes, and then we'll do a switch. So you can move to a different table topic, and people who are at those tables either can stay at the table and hear different council perspectives on the same topic, or they can move tables to move topics as well. So that's going to be the general framework, and look forward to having all the council doing that together. So I just wanted to make sure that we covered that before we run out of the allotted time that we've extended this meeting to. So the other item that's on here is quite a few hopper items. And given the late hour, I do want to assess with the council whether we want to begin looking at any of these hopper items, or whether we'd like to plan some time to look at these hopper items at an upcoming meeting. Councilmember Anderson?
Number 7 was a request from Chief Shepherd, and it does not have a co-sponsor, but I'd be interested in hearing for that with the budget conversation, so we can advance that off the agenda tonight, unless he wants to talk about it now. But I didn't just call you up. I'm sorry. I did not. But he sent that request to me, so I wanted to let you know that one of the ones that are here, I had 2 council member sponsors for the other two proposals.
Of course, yeah, and I think there are co-sponsors on most of these.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that I'll note is that while we did define this process, I think mostly we've only had one per meeting. This time we just happened to get 5, and I realized that when we created this process, we didn't create a process for prioritization. My proposal was going to be, if we had a little more time, that we do the ones that are kind of most related to budget, since that is upcoming, and most pressing tonight, and then we could move a few off. But I do want to assess, because some council members didn't even want to extend the meeting, whether there is appetite to delve into the hopper items tonight. We could cover 1 or 2, or we could find another time to do these. Councilmember Nueva Camina.
Thank you, Council President. My opposition was because, as some of us have been up for upwards of 18 hours at this point, I want to make sure that I'm honoring the conversation and that I'm bringing my best self to the conversation because it's important. So when we do go over, then I'm very well aware, and I can't speak for any of my colleagues, but I'm very well aware that past 10:30, I'm not my best self and I can't serve Redmond well.
Understood. Yeah, thank you. So do you have a comment on whether you would like to continue?
I'd like to table it.
You'd like to table it, great. Do other council members have opinions on whether you'd like to review the hopper items at all tonight? Councilmember Fields.
I really don't want to prioritize them. Would the next week's business meeting be, is there a way to put those on the agenda?
I'm not sure about the business meeting, but we could look at a different meeting instead of having to wait 2 weeks for the study session, potentially. We might actually be able to put them into committee for discussion, since I think there might be a little bit of extra time in committee next week.
I'm good with that since I think it's my committee.
I think it's Councilmember Stewart's, but Councilmember Stewart did say there was about 20 minutes of extra time.
And I was corrected by Deidre, who is awesome, by the way, and did a great job staffing us at the Downtown Redmond Art Walk, that it is 15 minutes that are available next week.
Great. If council members, so I'll just put this out as a proposal. If council members are amenable, I know that we would like to discuss these items, and there's many, I have an item in here as well that I put forward. We can find a time that is not a council talk time to be able to review these and can figure out a time within a short amount of time. Councilmember Anderson?
So there's no discussion tonight? Is that the goal of your, I was just going to make a motion to move the items to the FAC committee next week.
The planning.
Planning, excuse me, I'm sorry.
I think the discussion is that we could, if there's space, we can move them on there, and we'll take a look at the agendas. Council Vice President Forsyth?
I'm supportive of putting these on the committee of the whole, with the understanding that we all read and have very formed opinions so that we can get it done in that 15 minutes.
Yeah, and what I will say about these is I think when we've been discussing hopper items in the past, since we've had only one item, sometimes we've delved a little further than I think was the intention, which was really more get a sense of it and decide up or down, are we interested in spending more time on this item? And then we can delve into the back and forth and details on them. So when we do review these, let's just try to be, that's how I'm going to guide the conversation. And I just want everyone to be aware that it'll be more asking, is the council interested in reviewing this item further? And then we'll be able to schedule more time off of that. Councilmember Salahuddin.
Yeah, and knowing that there might be limited time constraints even next week, in order, are we going to go down as they are listed in our packet?
I think what I would propose is to propose an order that that makes sense based on the urgency of the issue. So what I was going to propose tonight is the ones related to budget, as well as potentially the one that Council Vice President Forsyth brought up, since it's one that's come up in community most recently. Councilmember Anderson?
I do think you need a motion because this was an approved agenda item to move the items to committee.
Well, we are still doing the agenda item. We're just not necessarily doing the hopper items. So I think, or we're not going through all the hopper items. If you all, I think if there's an agreement, we can just get them onto the agenda. I don't think we need a motion. But I will ask our clerk up here if there's something I'm missing in Robert's rules. Councilmember Fields.
Yeah, I actually agree with Councilmember Anderson. I think we should do a motion. There's nothing sacred about running 15 minutes over on a committee of the whole meeting. I think we've done that many times in the past. So my preference, give them all equal opportunity, not try. I think they are important to the people who propose them. And I think that we should, and matter of fact, I move that we add all of these hopper items to the committee of the whole planning for next Tuesday.
Is there a second? There's been a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, it passes unanimously, so we will see these on the next committee of the whole. And thank you, Councilmember Stewart, for chairing that meeting in advance. Thank you. And I believe that brings us to the end of our agenda, unless there are any items for good of the order. This meeting is adjourned.